Looks like Annie might be having some trouble joining, so I'm going to see if I can give her a hand. And as of right now, we are live.
Okay, sounds great.
So I'll see if I can get her.
All right, good afternoon and welcome to this Stillwater Area Public School School Board work session for Friday, February, what is it, 23rd? Or no, Thursday, February 23rd. So we are here to hear survey results in regard to a referendum that we are going to be putting on the ballot in November. So I'll turn it over to Superintendent Lansfeld. You are on mute.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Chair Petrie and Board Directors. I haven't done that for a while. I am happy to have Don Lifto with Baker Tilly here with us this evening. And he is with our community engagement firm for our district. They were able to go out and do one of our community surveys that we'll be conducting for our referendum. We'll be conducting another survey in late June, early July. And I will go ahead and turn the time over to Don Lifto and let us go ahead and have you present your information. And you're on mute. There we go.
At least we're consistent. Is my volume okay now?
Perfect. And welcome, Don.
Thank you. Before I get into it, I have to tell you that in preparing for this, I was kind of on memory lane. Some of you may know I was superintendent in Matamidi for 10 years, and we lived there for 33 years. And I go back so far that when I was superintendent in Matamidi, Dave Wedegren was superintendent in Stillwater. And we had a great relationship. So I have many positive memories about Stillwater and working with Stillwater. I had mentioned to Carissa that my laptop is being fixed and I'm using a loaner, and it's been a little bit inconsistent. So I'm hoping that I can share my screen. And if that's the case, I'm going to be going through the PowerPoint, and if not, Chris is going to take over. So we'll see if this is going to work this time for me. Let's see here. Well, I'm not seeing my PowerPoint on my desktop, so I'm going to have to ask Carissa to boot that up for me.
And Don, we are seeing your screen right now, it looks like.
You are?
We do see your screen.
Let's try it. Is that better?
Now you stopped. Now you just stopped screen sharing, yes. So would you like me to pull it up?
Yes, please.
Okay.
All right, so you can move on to the next slide. In terms of the purpose of this first survey, there were 4 things that we wanted to take a look at, which are listed under that first bullet. You have an existing operating levy that needs to be renewed, as you know, and we also wanted to test potential support for increase in property taxes to fund operations, technology, and/or high priority facility projects. We also wanted to get at least a preliminary indication of receptivity to potential tax increases. And then kind of woven around those 4 main categories, we did include some qualitative questions to provide additional information to the school board related to that as well. Go ahead. The district contracted for a minimum of 400 completed interviews within the boundaries of the school district. You actually ended up with 438. You can see the timing of those interviews. The margin of error is plus or minus 4.7%. So as you look at the various numbers that you'll see in the subsequent slides, the math behind a scientific random sample survey of this type is that there's a 95% probability that the true opinion of everybody living in Stillwater falls within that range. So if we had a particular slide that had 50% as the response, if you add 4.7 to that and subtract 4.7, there's a 95% chance that the actual opinion of everybody is in that range. Go ahead. The methodology used by Baker Tilly does include demographic targets. So while the calling is random, we do at the front end provide the call center with targets. We want to make sure that at least in the key demographic areas that the sample we draw closely mirrors the demographics of everybody living within the boundaries of the school district, and we don't inadvertently miss somebody. And as it turned out, the demographic targets worked very well. We were very close. If something was off a little bit, they were corrected statistically. And on the next slide, it shows you the targets in particular that we were focused on: age, gender, parent status, voting history, and geography. And with that last one, what we're talking about here is, where do people live within the boundaries of the district? We don't track, we don't control for cell phones or home ownership, but we do track for it. And since I'm always asked that question, I'll just start up the front end and tell you that 42% of the interviews were completed with cell phones and 58% with landlines. Go ahead. As I mentioned, there were three main areas that we wanted to focus on in this preliminary planning survey. One was your operating levy situation. The second one was reaction to potential high priority building improvements. And the third related to the potential for seeking additional funding to fund high priority technology initiatives. And we started with the operating levy. Go ahead. The first question related to the operating levy, as you can see from this text as I'm presenting, is focusing specifically on the renewal. It's not talking about asking for additional funding or additional taxes, just letting people know that the existing operating levy is coming to an end and it needs to be renewed. Includes information about the budget implications if that was not renewed, and ask people based on the information they received in this particular prompt if they would support the renewal. Go ahead. As you can see on this pie chart, the support for the renewal was very strong at 68%. That tells us that if this would stand alone as a ballot question, there is no reason to believe that it would not be strongly supported and be successful. Go ahead. After drawing that response about support for renewing your existing operating levy, the next section tested the support for the potential for seeking additional operating money to be used to expand learning opportunities, basically teaching and learning for students within the district. So based on what you know now, would you favor or oppose an increase in the operating levy? And this is the initial response. And I would characterize that as lukewarm. You had 49% saying based on what I know right now, I would not support that. Keep in mind, as you interpret that percentage, that the only thing they've heard so far was on the previous slide, which was fairly general and short. But that's the initial response, at least, to the potential for an increase. Go ahead. After drawing that initial response, or we sometimes call that the uninformed benchmark, because they just don't have much information yet, we tested a series of questions about a potential increase in the operating levy. And respondents were asked to tell us if you knew this particular piece of information, would that make you more or less likely to support an increase in the operating levy? These were done in random order to minimize any bias in terms of position on the list, in terms of people hearing it first or hearing it last. And several items were presented in two forms, or what we call a split sample test. I'll give you an example of one that is quite famous. It was a survey that I did in a large school district in Iowa a number of years ago. And half of the people in the survey were asked if they'd support a $100 million bond to upgrade the libraries. And the other half of the people were asked if they would support a $100 million bond to upgrade the media centers. And I won't ask you to guess on this, but there was almost 15% stronger support for libraries. Now, the only difference in that split sample question was one word. But the district learned in this particular case that the words do matter, and in terms of how you frame something, translated to support. Go ahead. Next slide. So here what we're doing is we're giving them an introduction to some more specific information about a potential increase in the operating levy. Go ahead. And this was the result of this section. Now, I told you that quick little story about that Iowa split sample. You have 3 split samples on this page. Excuse me. Yep, 3. So where you see a 14A and a 14B, that means that half of the 438 respondents on a statistical basis heard the A version, and half heard the B version. That provides us the opportunity to essentially look at that and say, does it make any difference? Now, I'll comment a little bit more on that in a second, but before I do that, just to help you know what you're looking at, when you look at the top one, providing more money to support academics of kids who need some extra help, the 84% is adding up all of the people who said, if I knew that, it would make me much more likely to support it. And the people who said, if I knew that, it would make me somewhat more supportive. So the 84 is adding those two together. And then the 11 that you see to the right of that is adding the folks that said that would make me somewhat less or much less likely to support it. So as you look at those numbers, remember we're adding the top 2 positive categories and the top 2 negative. Now, I mentioned to you that in the actual survey, these were done in random order. So some people heard question 12 first, some heard question 16 first. But for the purpose of presenting the results to you, they're presented in the order from strongest support to relatively weaker support at the bottom. Now back to the split samples for a second. The Q14 and A and 14B did have a significant difference in the level of support, depending on whether the word COVID was included or not. In the 14A question, it talked about more money to provide for academic help for kids who needed extra help, with no mention of COVID. In the 14B, it said essentially the same thing, but said to help them catch up, because of COVID. So it linked the two together. And in this particular case, without the COVID reference, it was 84% support, and with it was 72. Now it's very strong for both, but there was a significant difference between the two. And that may just simply be the negative connotations of everything we've been dealing with, with COVID for the last 12 months. The other split sample questions you see, the 15A, 15B, and the 14A and 14B, there's no difference between responses. So again, the prompt was, if you knew this, would it make you more or less likely to be supportive? And here you're seeing how people responded to that. Go ahead. Now that we've gone through that, we move to the second benchmark, which is informed support. So now you've heard a little bit more about this possibility of raising additional funding for operations. Tell me again, what do you think? Go ahead. And this is an interesting slide. This is the largest difference we've seen from initial response to response after information, maybe for as long as 15 or 20 years and hundreds of surveys. So remember that 36.9%, that's what people said right away before they got any information. And then the 56.1 is what they said after they had information. So a very positive response. Go ahead. So now we're moving from talking about operating levies to talking about bond levies. And so we're using the same general approach. We're starting with a short statement, and we're testing what we call initial support. And again, sometimes the researchers call that the uninformed support, only because people are telling us whether they would support or not support this based on limited information that you see in the middle of this screen. Go ahead. And so here's what it looked like initially. As you can see, the initial support was about 20% better than what you saw for the increase in the operating levy, with opposition of about 1/3 and no opinion at 11%. Go ahead. Similar to the process we went through with the operating, now we're shifting gears and saying, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about these facility projects that the district is considering. And for each of the statements, please tell me whether knowing that would make you more likely or less likely to support it. Go ahead. And so this screen looks a lot like what you saw on the operating. Remember now, for each of these rows, the number on the left is adding up people who said, if I knew that these bond projects would improve safety and security in the buildings, 67% said that would make me much more likely or somewhat more likely. And then the number to the right of that, using that first row as an example, 22% said that would make me somewhat less likely or much less likely. So again, the first number is adding up the two most positive responses, and the other number, the two negative responses. These were also done in random order, but you're seeing them in order from strongest support to weakest support. Now, looking at the left side, you'll see some of these A's and B's again, remembering that when you see an A and a B, that means that half of the people randomly heard the A question and half heard the B question. And again, we're testing whether language or some other nuance might affect how people respond. As it relates to the possible facility projects, in terms of the split sample question, it was only the 22A and 22B where the difference in language made a statistically significant difference in support. In the 22A, it's talking about expanding Brookview to address overcrowding. In the 22B, it's talking about expanding Brookview to manage growth. And when address overcrowding was in the prompt, there was 8% stronger support for that particular project. Go ahead. Now that you've heard some additional information about a proposal to fund improvements in the district, would you favor or oppose? Go ahead. And now we're looking at our informed support. So again, the 56 or 55.6 was how people responded initially to bond projects without a lot of detail or information. And the 57.0 is how they responded after they heard the information that was relevant to potential projects under consideration. Now, the good news is that that went up a little bit, but remember the margin of error is 4.7, and that's why there's a notation that the difference is statistically insignificant. Go ahead. Moving on to the third part of the survey, which was done in a similar fashion. Here we're talking about technology and the fact that the district might seek approval from voters to increase funding for projects that would provide students and schools with additional technology for learning. Based on what you know today, would you favor or oppose? And here's you see the response to that initial support question. As you can see, this one had the strongest initial support at 64. Remembering the operating levy, it started at 33, and the bond projects around 56. So this had the strongest initial support. Go ahead. Now I'm going to read you some statements about some of the technology improvements the district is considering. For each one of these, tell me if knowing that would make you more likely or less likely to support such a proposal. And here's the graph related to the questions focused on technology. As you can see, the overall level of support range from 60% up to 73, and all of them, well over majority support. Go ahead. Now that you've heard some information about the proposal to fund additional technology in the district, would you favor or oppose such a proposal? So here's the informed benchmark. Remembering we started at 63.6, just with that general statement at the beginning. Then we provided some additional information. Then we came back and said, tell me again, what do you think? And that came in at the 65.5. Again, it went up, but it was within the margin of error. Go ahead. This next section of the PowerPoint is looking at level of support based on these 6 demographic characteristics. And what we're measuring is what was the level of support after people got information. So after those more specific detailed questions. Go ahead. All right, so we're starting with parent status. So over, starting on the left-hand side of this graph, we're looking at the operating levy. Parents are in green, non-parents in gray, and alumni parents in that aqua. I'm going to spend a little bit more time with this chart just to make sure you know what you're looking at as we go through the rest of them. The definitions of parent, non-parent, and alumni parent are at the bottom. parent is somebody who's got one or more kids in one of the Stillwater schools right now. The non-parent bar are people who said they've never had kids in the Stillwater schools. And the aqua bar are people who said, I used to have kids in the district, but not anymore. And so over on the left, again, remember what you're looking at is what was the level of support for an operating levy increase after people got information. So you're seeing left to right, parent support, non-parent support, alumni parent support. Same information left to right for the bond, same information left to right for the technology levy. One of the things you'll notice on here that's highlighted in one of the bullets that oftentimes somewhat surprising to folks is that in all three cases, the support level from alumni parents was lower than the group that said they'd never had kids attending the district. I can tell you that if I've done this 200 times, 190 times, the alumni parent support was lower than the non-parent support. So that's the norm. So why is that? The part of the reason for that, according to some researchers, is that by the time you're an alumni parent, maybe your attitude is, you know, I was in the pep club, I was a volunteer coach, I did all these things, I contributed to the Stillwater Foundation, but my kids are gone now. It's somebody else's turn, quote unquote. So that's one theory. Another theory is that alumni parents oftentimes are at an age where they're pre-retirement and they're starting to worry about their 401k. They may have one or more kids in college. They might have one or more kids bouncing back home after college. And it probably is a stressful time for them from an economic point of view. Now, the differences aren't huge, so I'm not trying to overstate this. I just want you to understand that it's normal for alumni parents to be somewhat less supportive than non-parents. Go ahead. So here we're switching demographics. Now we're looking at what's the grade level of your youngest student attending one of the schools in Stillwater. So is your youngest child in elementary, is your youngest child in the middle school, or is your youngest child in the high school? And so again, from left to right, support for the operating, support for the bond, support for the technology. And typically what we see is somewhat stronger support in elementary and middle level parents as compared to high school parents, probably for the same reason. If my youngest is in high school, I'm kind of almost done. And somewhat similar to what I said about the alumni parent, maybe it's somebody else's turn to pick up the freight. Go ahead. Switching now to gender. So male in green and female in gray. So how did men respond as compared to women after they got information about the operating levy increase, about a potential bonding levy, about a potential tech levy? And so this is the support after information sorted by gender. Typically, we see stronger levels of support for women as compared to men, no matter what you ask them about the school district. That's generally true for Stillwater in this survey as well, although noted in a summary slide, the differences are more narrow than what we probably typically see. Go ahead. Go ahead. Okay, we're switching to age now. And so in this chart, we've got the 18 to 34-year-olds over on the left. And as you can see, moving left to right, each age group is getting older. And we're seeing support for the operating levy increase in green, the bond in gray, and the technology in the aqua. This profile is also very typical of what we usually see. It's fairly common for the strongest support for whatever a district might ask for to come from the youngest age cohort. That's very common. It's also fairly common, similar to what I said earlier, the support levels for the 65 group and up actually get a little bit better than that age cohort to their immediate left. Go ahead. This slide is looking again at how did people respond after they got information. This time, though, based on where do I live within the boundaries of the school district. Once again, the operating is in green, the bond in gray, and the technology in the aqua. And as you can see, the strongest support came from people living in the Woodbury area, and the comparatively lower support over on the right in the Hugo May Grant Marine areas. Go ahead. Now, this is based on home ownership, and the green is I own a home, I live in a home that's, and the gray is rent. This also is very typical of what we see usually with renters, somewhere between 10 and 15% more supportive than homeowners. And the reason for that, of course, is they don't necessarily connect the dots between a property tax increase and what their landlord is going to ask them to pay in rent. Go ahead. I think the last demographic slide relates to past voting activity. And for this one, what we do is for each person who was interviewed as part of this random sample survey, we look at a database that tells us how many times they voted out of the last 9 chances they had to vote. And so that vote could be for school board, it could be for city mayor, it could be a referendum, it could be a presidential election, whatever the last 9 were, how many times did you get there? And so dividing up this particular slide, folks who are in the very active, that's the aqua color, are your most active voters. They've gotten there at least 6 or more out of the last 9 times. The people in the middle are 3 to 5 roughly, and the less active are 0 to 2. So as in this slide, as you can see, the strongest support came from the least active voters. That's also closely correlates to young voters. And this is typically the case that your strongest support comes from your youngest voters and your least active voters. Go ahead. After testing initial support and support after information for a potential request to increase the operating levy, to do a bond levy, or to do a technology levy, the next part of the survey tested a range of potential tax impacts annually on an average priced home valued at $350,000. So everybody that was surveyed was tested along this range, although the order of how they heard the numbers changed randomly to avoid having the respondent anticipate that they were being taken up the ladder or down the ladder and having that affect their responses in some fashion. Go ahead. So this is a picture of what we found out. You can see the 50 over on the left side, which is the lowest one tested, and 200 over on the right, which was the highest one tested. Remember that some people heard the 150 first, other people heard the 50 last, so they were done in random order. When I see a slide like this, having worked on hundreds of these projects over the years, I'm happy with what I see here. And the reason I say that is the range that the administrative team selected to test provided a reasonable, feasible pathway towards a potential successful referendum in the future. As you might imagine, it's not good to see all four of the price points below 50% when you do a survey like this. So this is a healthy response and does provide you a realistic pathway to get something done. Go ahead. Now this is a busy chart, but I think I can explain it fairly easily. What we're doing here is we're taking how people responded, all 438 of them, and just dividing them into three piles. So we're saying, what did people say about these tax impacts? The ones who pretty much always vote, and that's the dark aqua color. What did people say who vote about half the time? That's the light green. And what do people say who don't vote hardly at all? That's the 15%. The thing about this particular chart that's unusual for Stillwater is usually what happens is that when we compare support for different tax increases, and then we look at that support based on how active the person has been in the past in terms of getting to the polls, those lines are not usually on top of each other. Usually you see significant differences. And in Stillwater's case, it was interesting that, as you can see, they're basically piled on top of each other. It's hard to tell, which one is which. So there was very consistent response. It didn't matter if you were 20 years old and an inactive voter, or if you were my age and voted 90% of the time. There was a very consistent response in terms of receptivity to a tax increase. Go ahead. Okay, we're switching gears now and looking at a couple of the qualitative things that we did, kind of wrapped around the levy questions. This first one is basically saying you're the teacher for the day. Give your local school district a grade A, B, C, D, or F. One thing interesting about this particular probe is it's been asked about 50 times nationally by Phi Delta Kappa. And so not only can you collect the response to what folks said in Stillwater, but you can compare it to the national sample. Go ahead. The overall response to this was very, very good, something you can feel proud of. The A's and B's were 54%, and the D's and F's were only 9%. So the ratio of really high grades to low are good. And also keep in mind when you look at data like this that 71% of the interviews were done with non-parents. So you're getting a really positive response about the overall quality across the board. Go ahead. And so here we're comparing Stillwater's response to this question to Phi Delta Kappa. Phi Delta Kappa last asked this question in 2019. And so you're seeing in green the response from this survey, And you're seeing in gray the response to the national survey in 2019. And the national survey is the exact same language. So it was not asking people to grade the nation's public schools. It was asking them to grade their local public school. So again, very positive in this regard. Go ahead. We also asked about the financial management of the district and to give grades on that as well. That never does quite as well as the overall quality that we looked at in the previous slides. You had 22% in the highest grades, A's and B's, and that 17% in the lower D's and F's. We had 40% who could not offer a response. Again, don't be surprised at that, with 71% of the interviews with non-parents. There isn't a great deal of media coverage that's positive about school finances. So as I said, this typically is not quite as positive and always has a higher percentage telling us they don't know or don't have an opinion. Go ahead. This is a tax aversion prompt that we have done hundreds of times that helps us kind of understand the underlying tax climate within a district. And so rather than asking people a question, they're actually reacting to a statement. I would never vote for a tax increase, no matter the amount or how the money raised would be used. So we're asking, do you agree with that? Disagree with that? And what we immediately look at is on the upper right, you see in the light green at 10% and in the gray at 8%. So you've got 18% of respondents agreeing with that statement. And remember, the statement was, I would never support any tax increase of any amount for any purpose. 18% is right in the norm of what we typically see. As you can see with the notation at the bottom, 90% of our surveys fall in that 15 to 25% range. So that tells you that you have a normal, healthy tax climate and aren't dealing with fundamentally hostile climate. Go ahead. We also had a prompt in asking people how aware they were of things going on in the district, events, issues, programs, etc. Go ahead. And this was also a positive response. You've got 62% telling you that either they're very aware or somewhat aware of what's going on. And again, with 71% of the interviews with non-parents, I would interpret that as a positive response. Go ahead. So these next few slides are summarizing some of what I've gone through, starting with the operating levy. As I mentioned earlier, support for renewing your operating levy with no increase and no tax increase was very strong at 68%. When people were asked about increasing the operating levy, initially support was at 36.9. After people got information, it increased significantly to 56.1. Go ahead. In terms of the items that were tested as potential uses of additional operating money, highest support shown for academic help for students and for expanding pathways, lower support for online learning. I've done a couple surveys recently that had similar responses, and I guess I wouldn't be surprised at relatively lower support just because of the challenges, despite the heroic work of our professionals. It's been hard work during COVID. The negative reaction to the items tested for the operating range from 11% to 50%. And as I mentioned earlier, support for more academic help for kids who are behind was stronger without a reference to COVID. Go ahead. Switching to the bond, when people had that initial paragraph with just a little bit of information, support started at 55.6. After information, it moved to 57, an improvement, but not at a significant level. The projects that were tested related to potential building improvements, highest support were for safety improvements and for managing growth, overcrowding, relatively lower support for a new high school auditorium. You see the range in negative reactions from 22 to 47. And as far as the split sample, as I talked about earlier, when Brookfield was talked about in terms of avoiding overcrowding, tested more positively than managing growth. Go ahead. With the technology levy, it started off with a pretty healthy 63.6 with minimal information. After folks got some information about potential uses of technology money, it moved to 65.5. Again, moving in the right direction, but not statistically significant. Right. As far as the 4 items that were tested relevant to technology, highest support came from upgrades to computing devices for teachers and staff. The 4 items overall had good support levels, averaging 65%. Compared to negative reactions at 27. No significant difference due to wording changes on the split sample probes that were done. At the time of this particular benchmark survey, the math worked out that total tax increase of $130 on an average priced home modeled as feasible at 54.7% support. And as I commented earlier, there was very little difference in support when looking at frequent voters as compared to infrequent voters. In terms of the general environment, the district did significantly more positive marks compared to the Phi Delta Kappa benchmark when asked to give the district a grade for overall quality. And the proportion of voters saying they would never support a tax increase for any reason was at 18%, which was in the normal range. In terms of recommendations and considerations, renewal of the operating levy without a tax increase has strong support. And if it becomes a standalone question, should pass. Support for an increase in the operating levy and the related increase in taxes started off relatively low, but had a very significant increase to 56.1% after people got more information. It'll be important, given that fact, to emphasize those points or expand upon them if indeed the district decides to go for an increase in the operating levy. Response to a potential tax increase for one or more of these uses was generally positive. As I said, right now, $130 tests as feasible. Comparing the 3 potential uses, the operating levy was at 56.7, building at 57.0, and technology at 65.6. And as a reminder, those are percentage of support after people got information. The differences in support levels between parents and non-parents were more narrow than what we typically see. The only one of the 3 where there was a a significant difference was with the technology. And in that case, parental support was 7% higher than non-parent. But for both the increase in the operating levy and potential bond levy, they were very close, which was a little unusual. I guess it depends on whether the cup is half full or half empty. I guess you could look at it and say, well, if the non-parents are just as supportive of parents, that's a good thing. I'm just simply telling you that there's usually a larger gap. As you continue your planning between now and when you'll do the tracking survey, keep in mind that the content, the cost, and the number of ballot questions are all going to be relevant, and they'll affect support. The tracking survey hopefully can be designed to test perhaps a more narrow set of proposals and more specific tax increases associated with whatever's tested to provide the admin team and the board with the best information possible before making a final decision about what's on the ballot in November of 2021. Go ahead. I'm not going to go through the additional slides at the end just to save time for questions, but what you do have available to you to look at is how the demographic controls worked out in the survey. So you can look again at parent status, at age, where people live, what kind of voter they are, gender, etc., and see in those graphs that the 438 people we interviewed on a random basis very closely mirrored the demographics of everybody. And then last, before we get to questions, what I went through today is what they used to call a 30,000-foot overview of the survey results. So kind of big picture results. The other reports that you either already have or will have very quickly are detailed demographic reports. And so with the detailed report, you can look at every single question in the survey and see how people responded based on age, based on gender, based on parent status, based on where they live. So that's a second report that you have. And then you also will have a report of the open-ended probe as well. So I'll be happy to take questions, and if we end up with more questions than we have time, Linda or Carissa can certainly forward those to me, and I can respond to more later as well. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. That was really informative. Appreciate that. I guess we have like 5 minutes left before we're supposed to start our regular school board meeting. So I wonder if there would be an opportunity to have you come back, perhaps. Melinda, what do you think about that?
I was just going to say my only question is, Don, would you be willing to come back to another work session? Because I'm sure we have a lot of questions, and after we have a chance to review the reports and the open questions, I'm sure that have even more after that.
Well, number one, I'd be happy to do that. And I'm also happy to, in addition to that, getting any additional questions by email that I can respond to. So yes, for sure, I'd be happy to do that.
Okay. Thank you, Don.
Okay, great. So it looks like 5 minutes left until our meeting. Do we want to take a couple of questions or just wait until we can do them all at once? Linda, do you have a preference on that?
Looks like Liz has her hand up if you want to take just a couple.
Okay, Liz.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. You referenced 2 additional reports, and for some reason we just got this report at 5:01, which is a minute after the meeting started. But when will we have access to the reports that you mentioned that get more into the open-ended questions and the demographic information you referenced.
I'll let Melinda respond to that.
We can get those out. We'll get those sent out.
And is there a reason we didn't get this until after the meeting started?
Yeah, I didn't have access because I haven't been through my emails. And so Joan just sent those out. We'll get the reports out after this meeting.
Anyone else right now? I just had a quick question. You were talking about the fact that of the respondents, 42% responded with cell phones and 58% landlines. Is that sort of a normal percentage breakdown? I mean, I have to tell you, I don't know very many people with landlines anymore. So I was kind of surprised by that figure.
We've been tracking that for, I don't know, maybe the last 3 years or so. And pretty much all of our projects fall between 40 and 60%. Some, when I say between 40 and 60, for some of them, the majority are done by cell phone and fewer by landline. Others more by landline, fewer by cell. But they pretty much are all in that 40 to 60% range.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Allison.
I guess I just wanted to say, I mean, obviously, thank you for coming, great information. But maybe we could just hold all the questions, in my opinion, just until we get all the raw data and then and have some time to sit on the presentation. So instead of starting.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense. It's 5:58 now. So perhaps we can, Don, thank you so much for coming and doing this. And so after we have a chance to take a look at the data that you're going to give us, then we'll have you come back and we'll have a little bit more robust question and answer session.
Happy to do that. Thanks.
Thank you, Don.
Great. Thank you. Everybody want to take a 1-minute break here before we start again? Okay, see you back here in a minute.
Bev, I'm going to start up the Valley Access stream, and I'll let you know when that's going when I get back.
Okay, great. Thank you.
We are live on all platforms.
Okay, thank you. Well, we do have a quorum. So I will call to order this school board meeting of Independent School District 834 Stillwater School Board for February 25th, 2021. Due to the current federal and state emergency declarations, the Minnesota directive to residents to stay at home, and guidance about limiting person-to-person contact due to the COVID-19 pandemic, this meeting of Stillwater Area Public Schools ISD 834 School Board is being conducted in accordance with Minnesota Statutes 13D.021, meetings by telephone or other electronic means. Due to the health pandemic, the school board determined that it is not feasible for at least one board member, the superintendent, or the school district's legal counsel to be physically present at the regular meeting location, and that it is not feasible for the public to attend this meeting at the regular meeting location due to the health pandemic. Persons may monitor this meeting from a remote location by streaming the meeting on the Stillwater Area Public Schools YouTube channel. So we will go to roll call. Joan, can you please take the roll call, please?
Director Hackert,
Here.
Director Onken.
Here.
Director Porbeni,
Yes, sorry.
that's okay. Director Riley,
Here.
Director Sherman,
Here.
Director Weisberg,
Here.
Chair Petrie.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. The next item is approval of the agenda. And I see a motion for an approval of the agenda. Director Onken, is there a second? Director Hackert. Joan, can you take the roll, please?
Director Hackert,
Yes.
Director Onken,
Yes.
Director Porbeni,
Yes.
Director Riley,
Yes.
Director Sherman,
Yes.
Director Weisberg,
Yes.
Chair Petrie.
Yes.
You have a 7-0 vote.
Great, thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is the superintendent's report. Superintendent Lansfeld.
Thank you, Chair Petrie and board directors. There's a lot going on in our district right now. This week is School Bus Driver Appreciation Week, and we want to thank all of our bus drivers, each and every one of them. They have a very tough job, but they do it with a smile. And I know even my own children's bus driver, it's Norm is his name, and we love him, and all of the bus drivers out there. Thank you from the bottom of our heart. We have been hearing from the community that there is a very high interest in being able to attend music performances and other school events, and we want to be responsive. So we will be measuring those spaces in the upcoming week, and there's a lot of requirements and factors to take into consideration. Performer requirements, audience member requirements, and rules and recommendations to wade through, but we will see what we can provide for our students and families, and more information will be coming in the very near future. 3 Stillwater area public school teachers have been nominated for the 2021 Minnesota Teacher of the Year Award. Alicia Farmer, algebra teacher at Oakland Middle School. Robin Hassani, first grade 100% online teacher at Anderson and Lake Elmo Elementary Schools. And Hannah Reyes, a Spanish immersion teacher at Lake Elmo Elementary. They are among just 75 educators who were chosen across the state. Candidates include pre-kindergarten through grade 12 instructors and early childhood family education and adult basic education teachers from both public and private schools. Congratulations for the nominations. And kindergarten orientation is on its way. Tomorrow, February 26th, we're trying something new and very different this year. This is our first ever virtual kindergarten orientation. For parents and guardians, so you are invited to join us for a live Zoom meeting to learn more about what you can expect in kindergarten, meet our staff, and ask questions. Visit your school website to see Zoom meeting times. And don't forget your enrollment materials. Also, we will be going out for an appraisal of the Withrow Elementary building. The last appraisal was completed in 2016. There's no commitment to sell the building, but there has been an inquiry from an outside entity. Also, our online learning update that was supposed to be this week, we are putting that off for another 2 weeks until our next school board meeting, because we have a lot of information to go through. The pre-registration survey, just for an inquiry for interest, ended yesterday, and we want to go through that to provide the best information possible. And finally, the Stillwater FFA members have been very successful in a number of recent virtual competitions during the winter season. Senior Brianne Johnson earned a second place in the Region 4 Floriculture Career Development Event, CDE, and will advance to the state competition later this spring. The floriculture includes the identification of flowers, houseplants, and tools, problem solving, design evaluation, and a written exam on plant anatomy and physiology, pest management, greenhouses, and plant production. With that, that's the end of my superintendent report.
All right, thank you very much. Director Riley.
Thank you. Superintendent Lansfeld, I have a question back up into your report there about the survey for Withrow Elementary, and I'm not sure why or who authorized or who moved this forward. Could you please respond?
Yes, I am at this point right now.
Can you explain why you feel that it is necessary?
Yeah, the last survey, the appraisal was done in February of 2016, and just want to make sure that we have an accurate appraisal.
Can you explain why we need an accurate appraisal at this time? That isn't answering my question.
We have an outside entity that is interested in possibly putting in an offer on the building, and we would like to explore that at this time.
Can you explain more about the outside entity, please?
I don't want to identify them at this time. They've asked not to be identified publicly.
So this, I'm having an issue here because I specifically asked at our last work session, not the one we just had that didn't have time to answer questions to, about interest in programming. And I was flat out denied asking the community what their interests were. And the district wasn't interested in this board, this newly elected board wasn't interested in finding out those answers. I'm concerned at this point that the community is being neglected and they are not being considered in part of this equation as far as selling Withrow. And I think at this time I may have to take it upon myself to hold community forum and search out that information on my own. I think this is a very poor choice. I think it is detrimental to the health of your levy, and I'm not sure why you would choose at this time to go down that pathway.
Director Weisberg.
Thank you. I would also like to point out that the only other time the Withrow building has come up with anything other than trying to be used as a school, when we were told we were trying to use our buildings efficiently, was the district was going to give the building away. And we weren't told that there was an appraisal at all. So finding out now that there's an appraisal from 2016 is news that the previous board was never given. So I'm going to ask to see that appraisal to see what the valuation was. And if somebody is interested in purchasing the property, why are they not paying for the appraisal? And why are we considering doing that? This is ridiculous.
Director Sherman.
I think we're all getting ahead of ourselves here. This is an appraisal because we've had interest expressed in the property. And so I look at this as doing fiscal due diligence for the community members. We are ultimately managing budgets and we have to explore opportunities as they arise. We have a property, it's being unused right now. We haven't made any decisions, but in order to make a decision, we have to have the best information possible. So we're just information gathering and collecting the information needed so that we can eventually make decisions if it comes to that point. We don't know anything about this interest expressed, but it's certainly the next step for the board to be able to make a decision.
Director Parvani.
Thank you, Chair Petrie. So we have a building, Director Sherman, thank you for that information as well. We have a building that's been sitting idle for a couple of years now. We spend almost $75,000 or so for maintenance of the building. We talk about fiscal responsibility. Like Director Sherman said, we were put in this position.
Director Parvani, I think we may have just lost you there. Oh, there you go. Go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I think it's important for us to spend taxpayers' money appropriately. And so if we are going to leave a building there that is not being used and we're paying for maintenance and all of that, when that money can be used somewhere else, I think it's important for us as a board to explore every option. And again, like Director Sherman said, it's an appraisal. You just don't put.
Okay, you kind of froze up there again. Oh, now you're back.
I'm back. Okay, thank you. So this is an appraisal, and I think as a community, it's important for us to explore all opportunities that comes in. And so we will continue to serve you as best as we can because we promise you that we will be fiscally responsible, and this is part of the process. Thank you.
Director Riley.
Thank you. I can understand what you're saying. However, I disagree because I think it is unnecessary to spend the money prior to surveying the community to find out what they want. That would be actually a poor idea and poor management of community tax dollars if you go ahead and do an unnecessary appraisal of a building and spend that money. And also to not even consider trying to improve our academic or our student capture rate after we've had such a decline, and we have lost 270 students already this year, that you wouldn't try to do something in this community to bring these students back here or attract new students. That to me is more financially sound to increase our funding than it is to sell off valuable real estate that you can never get back once you make that decision.
Director Onken?
Thank you. Yeah, I going along with Director Sherman and Director Berbini, I think it's okay to do an assessment. If nothing else, it gives us the information to know what the building is worth. At the same time, also, if we want to go back to the community or the CDT, that was one of the recommendations of the CDT. And if we want to get serious about that and start to make some of those changes that were recommended there, one of those recommendations was to consider selling the Withrow building.
Director Sherman.
I guess I'm looking at the meeting. I don't see that we need to continue to belabor the point. If there's nothing new to say, I would like to move on with the agenda.
All right, Director Riley.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I know it's hard to hear this, but you are impacting an area of our community that is not being represented by this current board. And the fact that I was told on the phone by our board chair that these 5 board members support the Denise Pontrelli's CDT recommendations without moving forward and asking this community what it is they will support. I just can't even believe you won't even come forward asking if they will support it or not. You just want to make these decisions and spend money beforehand. It's ludicrous, it's absurd, it makes 0 sense whatsoever.
We will move on, but I just want to say that all this is bringing information to the board. We have not made any, we're not necessarily on a path to sell, but we have a fiduciary responsibility to respond when people come to us and express an interest in buying a building that is no longer being used. We have capacity for more students in our 2 northernmost schools right now in Rutherford and Stonebridge. Neither one of them are full. I'm just not quite sure that we need another elementary school in the northern part of the district. So we are going to go forward. Superintendent Lansfeld certainly has the authority to go forward with an appraisal on this property. And we will discuss this. It will rise to a board level at a certain point, I'm sure. But right now, all she's going to do is just get an appraisal. So thank you for the discussion. We're going to move on to the next item, which is the student reports. All right.
I'll start off with the academic report. Not only is SHS offering in-person school support for select students, but clubs and activities are now allowed to meet in person with peers and advisors during office hours. Sophomores with a GPA of at least a 3.85 or juniors with a GPA of at least a 3.65 are invited to apply to be a part of the National Honor Society. This should be completed by March 1st in order to be inducted for this upcoming year. Between February 16th and March 12th, teachers at the high school will be communicating with parents about how students are performing in class in replacement of typical conferences. And if you are interested, the first semester honor roll is now available for viewing on the school website. And then moving on to activities, Amnesty International is hosting a hygiene drive March 11th through 12th from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. To donate, drive to the back of the SHS parking lot to drop off items like shampoo and conditioner, soap, toothpaste, toothbrushes, and more. The tentative date for prom is May 1st and is currently a senior-only event. However, the date could be moved depending on restrictions. Last week, NHS hosted another successful blood drive at Rock Point Church where many community members showed up to donate. And lastly, the SHS speech team is having a wonderful season, placing high in all of their competitions, despite the added obstacle this year of having to do it virtually. And I'll pass it over to Bryn.
Thanks, Mara. Tonight I'll talk about sports. Boys swim and dive won the conference title this week with a win over Roseville on Tuesday. The boys had their last meet of the season last night against Irondale. The girls hockey team lost for the first time this season last Saturday to Roseville. The score was 4-3 in overtime. However, they bounced back with a win at Mounds View on Tuesday. The girls basketball team remains unbeaten with wins over Park and Forest Lake this past week. They will host Woodbury on Friday. The wrestling team defeated Mounds View last Saturday and remains unbeaten in conference play. The team will travel to Woodbury on Saturday. Congratulations to our boys and girls alpine ski teams for earning the top seed in their sections. They will compete in Giants Ridge next week. The boys and girls Nordic ski teams both placed second in their conference and will compete in sections next week at Battle Creek Park. Our gymnastics team remains unbeaten with a win over Mounds View last week. They will travel to Park on Friday. Our adapted hockey team ended their season with a scrimmage on Wednesday. Due to COVID, they were not able to compete in games, but they worked very hard in practices all season long. The boys basketball team lost 2 close games last week to Forest Lake and Irondale. They will travel to Woodbury on Friday. And lastly, our boys hockey team tied Forest Lake and lost to Woodbury last week. They will play Cretan Durham Hall this Saturday. That concludes our report.
Thank you very much. Okay, we were going to move on to the next item, which is open forum.
Board, I just realized that there was a problem with the email that I sent out for open forum and it didn't ever leave my email box. So I just resent it about 60 seconds ago. Can we bump open forum down a notch on the agenda and give people a chance to join?
Yes, we will. We'll do that.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to move along to the consent agenda. On the consent agenda tonight, we have the minutes of February 11th, the minutes of February 18th, the minutes of February 18th, February 18th special meeting, minutes of February 18th closed meeting, minutes of February 23rd special meeting, the disbursement register, accept gifts and donations for January, accept the treasurer's report for January, and the human resources personnel report. Is there a motion to accept the consent agenda? Director Sherman. Second, Director Weisberg. Director Weisberg?
Yeah, I was actually going to pull item H, the
Okay.
human resource report.
Okay, all right.
But I'll second after that.
Okay, great. So we have a motion and a second to accept the consent agenda items A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. So Joan, can you take the roll on that, please?
Director Hockert,
Yes.
Director Onken,
Yes.
Director Porbeni,
Yes.
Director Riley,
Yes.
Director Sherman,
Yes.
Director Weisberg,
Yes.
Chair Petrie.
Yes,
You have a 7-0 vote.
thank you very much. Director Weisberg.
Thank you. We have quite a few pretty significant retirements. I would just like to read really quickly. Gretchen Acker as a paraprofessional retiring after 14 years. Leanne Fossey is elementary ed at Lily Lake, retiring after 23 years. Roxy Humphrey retiring from Anderson after 22 years. Timothy Junko retiring from Stillwater Middle, 31 years. Tracy Kempenick, I'm so sorry if I'm pronouncing things incorrectly. Anderson Elementary, 25 years. Todd Rao, retiring after 28 years, Oakland Middle School. Francis Rumportal, retiring after 33 years, Lily Lake. Bridget Sandiger, Anderson Elementary, retiring after 16 years. Karen Swagger, retiring 24 years from ALC. Beth Tolis, 29 years, Lily Lake Elementary. And Susan Van Tassel, 6 years, Lake Elma Elementary. And I just wanted to say thank you very much to those teachers, and we very much appreciate your service. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Weisberg. Would you like to move that we accept that item then? Great, thank you. Is there a second? Director Onken. It's been moved and seconded that we accept the Human Resources Personnel Report. Joan, can you take the roll on that, please?
Director Hackert,
Yes.
Director Onken,
Yes.
Director Porbeni,
Yes.
Director Riley,
Yes.
Director Sherman,
Yes.
Director Weisberg,
Yes.
and Chair Petrie.
Yes,
You have a 7-0 vote.
thank you so much.
And Board Chair Petrie, we do have one open speaker or open forum speaker available for this evening, if you're ready to do that now.
Sure, thank you very much. School board meetings will be held electronically until further notice. Oh, yes. If you wish to speak to the school board, you will be able to do so at the start of the school board meeting during open forum. A sign up for open forum speakers is available online on the board webpage from 3 to 4 p.m. on the day of the meeting to provide time for instructions to connect to the meeting to be sent to speakers. You may sign in only for yourself, not for other individuals or groups. The order of speakers will be established on a first come, first served basis. Due to time limitations, we will limit the number of speakers to 15, with each speaker receiving 3 minutes. You will need the ability to join the meeting electronically, either by phone or online. You will receive instructions for joining the meeting 30 to 60 minutes prior to the start of the meeting. Stillwater Area School District welcomes input from citizens as community involvement fosters better decision-making and improved learning experiences for all students. While comments and questions are welcome during open forum, law prohibits the board from discussing concerns about individual employees or students in a public meeting. We will stop the proceedings immediately if employee or student privacy issues are raised and direct the speaker to forward comments regarding individual employees or students to the superintendent. Because we are modeling civil discourse for our community, speakers must present their testimony in a respectful manner. Vulgarity, character attacks, malice, or specific complaints identifying staff or students by name or implication will not be permitted. The board will not deliberate, discuss, or engage in conversation with speakers during open forum. However, the board may ask administration to review the concerns presented. And with that, Carissa, I think we're ready for our first speaker.
All right, we actually just have one speaker tonight. It's Carl Blondin, and I will let Carl in now. Good evening, Carl. We are ready for you if you are there.
I am here. I don't see my face though.
We don't see your face, but we can hear you.
It has asked me to start my video. Okay, here we go. Thank you. Carl Blondin, Stillwater, Minnesota. Madam Chair, members of the board, Superintendent Lansfeld. Today, the Washington County District Court filed an order denying this district's Rule 12 motion for judgment on the pleadings for counts 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the Hoheisel lawsuit against this district. The court did grant the judgment on counts 5 and 6, which are rather insignificant. We are facing a lawsuit now for a violation of the open meeting law, a violation of the Minnesota Whistleblower Protection Act, a violation of the Minnesota Human Rights Act, and a violation of the Minnesota Data Practices Act. I'm surprised there was not an announcement about this in the superintendent's report. This district faces serious 7-figure liability in this lawsuit. Our insurance policy does not cover statutory attorney's fees, nor does it cover punitive damages. The cap on the damages from our insurance policy is $1 million. This lawsuit promises this district exposure well in excess of $1 million. At this point, there is a conflict of interest for the attorney defending us. He is also defending Sarah Stivland. All the counts against Sarah Stivland are proceeding. This board's going to have to address that issue. Additionally, this board should seek advice from council on indemnification from people who may be responsible for these damages. The taxpayers deserve that consideration. This is a very, very serious lawsuit. We are facing a very skilled opposing attorney. I have no doubt that he will put the district through the paces during discovery. I ask that this school board have the depositions held on school board property in the Oak Park building where there's a large room, and that they be broadcast live, that the tapes of those depositions be available for the public, and that transcripts of those depositions be available for the public, so we can understand the testimony and understand who is responsible for putting this district in such a grave financial peril. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Blondin.
And that concludes our open forum for the evening.
Okay, thank you, Carissa. Okay, we are going to move on to reports. And the first item under reports is on the dial learning update. Superintendent Lansfeld.
Okay, thank you, Chair Petrie and board directors. We'll give it just a second to come up.
I apologize, just one moment.
That is just fine. While it's coming up, we were able to hold a special board meeting Tuesday evening to go through this report. So I won't go in a lot of detail tonight. We'll just do a quick overview. So the governor came out with new information last week, and our county rate data continues to go down. These are 14-day case rates per 10,000. Washington County's 22.7. Our surrounding counties continue to go down as well. Changes to our Minnesota Safe Learning Plan allows middle and high school to operate in hybrid or in-person learning if they are able to implement additional mitigation strategies. Provides new guidance on mitigation strategies for in-person learning for our secondary students, phases out the rolling start to slowly bring back students. The rolling start was bringing back 3 grade bands at a time. This lessens the focus on county data as a singular determining point when considering learning models. Minnesota's Safe Learning Plan. New mitigation strategies came out February 17th. In addition to the mitigation strategies released back in December, secondary schools should strongly recommend students and families receive COVID-19 testing every 2 weeks. Students must maintain 6 feet of physical distance from one another throughout the school day whenever feasible. When 6 feet cannot be met, a minimum of 3 feet must be maintained, and assigned seats in the cafeteria and on the bus that will be in place. And we know that 3 feet will not always be in place, because it's a big difference when students are in seats versus when they're sharpening their pencils or picking up materials. And we know that at the secondary level, the administration and teachers, they've put in a lot of work to find enough space for lunchtime. And then on the bus, there will be a seat, an open seat behind the bus driver. Windows will be cracked, and then assigned seats. Okay, operational capacity challenges. We know this was the biggest concern before winter break. When students come back in person, there will be limited technology devices. So we have been very fortunate to have enough hotspots and devices for our students at this time. Full classrooms, we'll have full cafeterias, full buses. That means less physical distancing. We will have schedule changes right before the end of a grading period. We know there will be emergency transitions between in-person and at-home learning. We've already experienced that at an elementary school. There will be more contact tracing, and the contact tracing when there are more students and staff in the building, it takes a lot of time. There's a lot of detail and a lot of thought that goes into that. Make sure that we do it right. That's the last thing we want to do is to call people up and let them know that they're in quarantine. The quarantine time, we have gone to a shorter quarantine time from 14 days down to 10, from 10 down to 7, but still that's a significant amount of time to be out of school. And then there are staffing challenges. We were short bus drivers. Last week we were short 23 bus drivers. So we just met with MTM, that's our bus company, and they assured us that they do have the availability to borrow bus drivers from a couple of different areas where they have other bus drivers. And so we are very fortunate. They say that we should be able to fill the routes. Substitute teachers and paras, we are raising the rate of pay for them. And custodians, we continue to hire the casual positions. Those are the positions that will be ending at the end of the year. Food service, we're continuing to hire 8 positions that still need to be filled. And then health staff, we were short a couple of positions, but they should be filled by the time the high school is in place if this plan is approved by the school board. Okay, this is our timeline for revision for our return of our secondary students to an in-person learning model. As you recall, right after winter break, we returned our preschool students to an adjusted hybrid model, and now they are in person. January 27th, grades K through 2 returned to a 4-day-a-week in-person model. February 10th, grades 3 through 5 returned in person 4 days a week. And on February 16th, our grades 6 through 12 students identified for in-person intervention return. That's just over 400 students. Our elementary students have been in person 4 days a week until March 1st. They've been at home learning asynchronously on C days. After March 1st, they will be 5 days a week. Our proposed adjustment to our secondary schedules will be in person March 1st for grades 6 through 8 and our GATE 4 through 5 students returning to in person 4 days a week, C days on the 5th day for asynchronous learning. And on March 8th, our grades 9 through 12 return to in person 4 days a week and at home learning asynchronously on C days. We need these C days required by the state because our secondary teachers are teaching, the majority of them, both on the dial students, which are in person or would be in person at this time, and the 100% online students, both. And when that is occurring, the state is requiring that school districts supply an extra or 30 minutes a day prep or an equivalent to that, which would be the C day. The state also requires school districts to provide teachers 2 transition days to prepare for that shift into a different learning model. So February 25th and 26th would be no school for grades 6 through 8, and March 4th and 5th would be no school for grades 9 through 12 for those transition days. And again, a lot of, well, every year, teachers spend weeks, sometimes a month, getting ready to start a school year. We're giving them 2 days to shift into a different learning model. So it's a lot of work, and the teachers have been working very, very hard to do this. So with that, do you have any questions? And I know this was very brief, but we went into a lot of detail Tuesday night on this.
Questions, anyone? Director Hockert.
Thank you, Chair Petrie. Quick question about the subs. You mentioned that the sub pay is increased. Are the subs able to get vaccines? Are they in any kind of queue to get vaccines along with teachers, or do they not qualify in that same group?
It's my understanding that they have been able to go into the state vaccine connector and register now.
Oh, okay. That's really good news. Would they be ranked beneath? I mean, I guess.
We have no idea how they're ranked. So I know some people, you know, younger than me have been able to get an appointment for a vaccine before me. So we don't have control on how the state is ranking it. Okay. But we do know that more and more people, educators, education staff are receiving appointments, and Washington County Health Department was able to receive another 1,000 vaccines this week for education staff within our county. And so we do know the vaccine appointments are coming.
Thank you.
And on that note, have you heard whether there's going to be a bump up in the number of vaccinations made available? I know that we were sort of in a bit of a lull there because there were some transportation issues because of the weather. Have you heard anything specifically about those vaccinations for teachers and staff?
Yeah, they're coming, and many people today were able to receive appointments.
Oh, good.
So, and Dr. Cherry, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Thank you, Superintendent Lansfeld, members of the board. Yes, we are hearing very good news about vaccine supply, specifically for educators. When we say educators, we mean all individuals who work and support our schools. And so that includes our bus drivers, childcare workers, cafeteria, child nutrition workers. That is everybody who's supporting our kids. And we are, although we have no control and actually can't even ask the question if someone has received a vaccine yet, because that is private health data. We do know, we've heard from many individuals within the last week that they are getting the calls and the texts and are able to set those appointments.
Good, thank you. Director Weisberg.
Sorry. Thank you. Could you just give us a little clarification on the C days for elementary teachers and why they will no longer get C days and secondary teachers will get those days?
Would you like me to?
Yeah, go ahead.
Superintendent Lansfeld. Okay, thank you, Director Weisberg. C days are something that is set aside for additional planning and intervention with students who are learning on multiple learning models. And so as we come back in person, all of our on the dial students are working directly with on the dial teachers at the elementary level. Our 100% online students work only with 100% online teachers. And so we're able to set aside specific sections based on the learning model. The same is not true in our secondary schools. We have something that we have not so lovingly come to call sprinkles. That happens where we have staffed our buildings at the secondary level, where a teacher is required to teach students at the same time in the same course that might be learning from home or might be in school. And those again are the learning models that the family have selected for their children. But due to the staffing models, that's the difference between elementary and secondary. As we have been in person now with elementary, one thing that we did is we kept those C days in place for a few weeks as we transitioned back. We wanted to have some time to assess our staffing, assess our operational capacity, and we needed some information to find out if we were going to have a large number of elementary teachers who would have students in their classrooms that would be out for extensive periods of time due to quarantine. And what we've found in the last few weeks is that we're not having a substantial number of students out due to quarantine. When we have had some positive cases in our schools, what has happened is the entire classroom has shifted into a 100% distance learning format. And so in that sense, the teacher moves with the students into that new learning format, and they're not required to do both of those things and trying to teach students in those two different learning models. Those are the two big things that we have been considering as we've wanted to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our students and also meeting the needs of our teachers to meet the teaching parameters, and also what Superintendent Lansfeld explained earlier. The state has indicated this year, if a teacher is teaching in distance learning or in a model where they're teaching both students in person and at home, that they are required, or we as a district are required to provide them that extra 30 minutes of prep time during the instructional day. And so since that's not happening at the elementary, that's why it's not necessary.
Just one quick, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And then just one quick follow-up. So then at the elementary level, if a family elected to choose the distance model at this point, then they would have a completely different teacher, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you very much.
Director Sherman.
Actually, I'm glad that Director Weisberg asked that question, because I had emailed that to you too, Melinda, earlier this week. And just in follow up to that, because it is kind of concerning. I know those C days were supposed to be for, identifying which kids maybe need extra support, teaching quarantined children, which it sounds like is maybe not an issue like you thought it would be. And so I'm glad that it seems to have resolved itself. If by making this change, something changes in that scenario, are you open, like, is there an evaluation process kind of that will be ongoing in terms of, hey, we did this and something fell through the cracks, something suffered. I mean, all of this is you're doing the best you can, right? I guess it's, would you come back to the board if something became an issue?
Yeah, we're going to have to continually be evaluating this because we've never done this before. And things keep changing weekly. So I have to give the teachers credit. They're working harder than they've ever worked before. And the elementary teachers have been back for a few weeks now, and they're doing an amazing job. I've been out in some of the schools and wow, they're doing a great job. So, and it's not easy, and I don't mean to paint a rosy picture, but they have been doing their very best.
Okay, thank you. Director Sherman.
From our last meeting, I know just on Tuesday when we had this report, I just wanted to clarify, because there was a few people called me just having some confusion. If you are a family that doesn't want to go back in person in secondary, you want to wait till that April 5th. That's the plan you were anticipating. You made plans. You can make that change at any time, correct? I just kind of want that out there for people. So if you really wanted that April 5th timeframe, and that was what was going to work best for your learner and for your family, you can still do that. And then if you want to change your mind and actually come back in person, that starts with your student's counselor. That's
okay. Correct. But it's difficult when you have younger children that are at the elementary level, because at the elementary level, that on the dial, that has to do with staffing, because that classroom is that classroom and you can't keep adding to it or you go above the classroom ratio. We can put them on a wait list, or they could possibly provide transportation to another school if there's room in the other classroom, if they want to go back, but it's more difficult to move it after a certain point. But the secondary is a lot more flexible.
And that starts again with the secondary counselor. Even at the middle school level, do they
the counselor start with the counselor? Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else with questions? Director Hockert.
Kind of along the same theme here of the online students, and at the secondary level, how that might look a little different. So if students are at the secondary level and they choose not to go back at this point, they have the option to stay distance do they have, is there a certain timeline that they need to choose to go back in person? And then kind of along with this, Dr. Cherry, at our last meeting, you did a nice job kind of explaining how distance learning, online learning might look a little different as we transition. If you could just give a quick little snippet of what that's going to look like, just to review. Thank you.
Yes, Director Hockert. So as we are coming back in person, we know that some of our families may decide to stay in distance learning a little bit longer. If they're considered an on-the-dial student at this time, we ask that they contact the school counselor so that we know that they will be learning from home, and we can anticipate that as we are figuring out our seating assignments, seating charts. This is a new year where we have assigned seats in the cafeteria, assigned seats on buses. Those are all things that we need to account for. So we ask that they make sure that they do contact the school counselor, and that we are aware of the learning model and anticipate what to expect on that first day. As families want to come back in person, no, there's not a deadline at this time, but just keep in contact with the school counselor. Now, as we're talking about what does instruction look like? What does a typical day look like when we know that we're going to have students who are in the classroom and students who are trying to learn from home. And all of these students are used to, up until this point, this third quarter, they have had a synchronous instructional model during the day that starts a little bit later in the day. That's been to account for teenagers' sleep schedules. And now what that means that we're coming back in person is the schedule is going to adjust, and we need to follow the bell schedule. So are those online, those 100% distance learning students need to adjust their time so that they can connect with their teacher in their classroom during their scheduled class time. The synchronous piece of that instruction will look different depending on the subject area, depending on the teacher, depending on the learning objectives and the learning activities for the day. So the amount of time that will be synchronous, meaning that the teacher will be connecting with the students at home via Schoology and via Zoom, those things, those times will be adjusted based on the learning needs. How they'll be connected is that the teachers have all been ordered an external microphone and will be asked to stand in a certain area of the room so that their voice can be picked up by that microphone, which will be a little bit different. That'll be tough for educators because educators are used to circling around the room, engaging with students in small groups. And so it's going to look different for students working, trying to learn from home. And so those are some of the things where we know this is going to be a little messy to start, and we ask for grace as we embark on this new type of synchronous instruction with people in different models and trying to move forward. But we do anticipate that there will be a synchronous component in most of those courses throughout the day, and teachers will be informing the students of what that looks like.
Thank you. Director Carbani.
Thank you, Chair Petrie. Jennifer, thank you for the presentation. You know, my mind was just taken while you were speaking. I'm still trying to understand, and I know it's really complex. I know it's hard. I know we don't have the technology. I know we're trying to do our very best to make sure the students that are online distance learning are getting just as much. But you said something about teachers, you know, being in a specific space so the microphone can actually, you know, students who are on distance learning can hear what the teacher is saying. What when the teacher is writing on the board? Well, it'll be a bit difficult.
That you're right, Director Probeni. That is something that we are taking into consideration and having to make some considerations for. One thing that our students are used to is that all of the information is being delivered via Schoology right now. And so students have access to slideshows. Teachers use Google slideshows very frequently and different things like that that help their presentation along or their lessons along. And so a lot of those visuals that we use in classrooms are delivered in that way. And so students may be watching that slideshow on their own computer as they're also joining that Zoom link.
Can I just ask a follow-up question there? You know, and again, I understand, you know, there are different learning styles for students, including adults. Some students prefer to hear, some will, you know, want to see what's going on, some both. It's going to be, do we have an opportunity to provide extra support for students that are actually not on the dial, but online?
Director Corbini, I think we lost you there for a second.
What I think she was asking would extra support for students at the high school.
Can you hear me?
Yep, at the high school, they have office hours in the afternoon, and students have access to teachers after lunch. So they should have 3 blocks of time where they should be able to access teachers for that extra support.
Yeah. So I really think that we need to take that into consideration. If not, a lot of our students will suffer. And parents will also suffer, you know, seeing the kids not being able to learn as well and actually not doing well.
Director Sherman.
This is always like a tricky, I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but being new to the board, I'm always interested in if, and you don't have to, but Mara and Bryn certainly are super impacted by this decision. And so if they have any questions or comments, I just want to make sure that they know that they're always welcome to speak and to ask those questions. And boy, I mean, we would appreciate the perspective. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Yeah, thank you. It's a lot of information to take in, so I'm kind of trying to even figure out like how I feel about all of this. But to me, my main concern about the high school is just the high population of students. So I guess I was wondering, is there any like additional plans for hallways specifically, or how are we going to fit classes that aren't cut in half into regular sized classrooms safely? Are we just sticking with the like one-way hallways and hoping for the best, or is there any other things we have planned?
Yeah, at the high school, it's about 29% of the students have chosen to be on distance learning. Most of the metro area districts, once they decide to go in person, that goes up even a little bit higher. All of the hallways, as you've probably seen, if you were in hybrid, have the one-way directional signs on the floors. And then all of the classrooms, they're going around and they're measuring to make sure that all of the distancing is adequate. In the classrooms, there are some math classes and other classes that are a little bit larger, so they're in the double wide spaces. And then classes such as music and some of the larger classes that need space, they might take place in the auditorium or other places where they can have a appropriate physical distancing. So they're still working out some of the details at the high school. I think they have everything worked out at the middle schools at this point. So, but yeah, it's not going to be perfect all of the time, because you know what it's like when you're walking around, and kids like to be social. So, and so do the adults. And I know from my own daughter's experience, being in the sprinkles, you know, with students in the classroom and at home at the same time, it was difficult the first week or so with teachers getting a little bit used to the projection and the sound and where they stand and where they can move and using the board or not. And then it got better and better and better. Some students, as Dr. Pravini said, you know, different learning styles can thrive in that. Sometimes it's a little bit more difficult, and we need to figure this out. I wouldn't say these are ideal circumstances. These are very difficult and challenging circumstances. And I'm hoping we can get to a better place soon with vaccines and get back to some type of normalcy soon.
So I just had a follow up on that last thing that you said, Superintendent Lansfeld. I know that students have the choice as to whether to come, the on the dial students have a choice as to whether to come back or whether to stay in distance. And I'm just wondering if you have any numbers on that so far, as to how many of those high school students in particular might choose to stay in distance, at least for the rest of the third quarter.
Yeah.
And I probably put you on the spot there, sorry.
Yeah, I have those numbers written down. If you give me just a second. We had them broken down. I know I have them. You would ask that one. I just had those.
Sorry.
That's okay. I will
Does anybody
find
else have another question they'd like to throw out there?
Yeah,
Okay,
there's
Director
another
Hackert.
question.
We'll wait for Melinda to find her answer. Yes, Director Hackert.
Okay, I'll buy you some time. My question has to do with ventilation systems. How are have you done any updates in the middle schools or the high school with ventilation? What are the classrooms like? Are there any like windowless classrooms that don't have an option to open windows? Is that something that we are considering for getting good airflow for all of those in those working spaces?
Yeah, they did that before school even started. They cranked up the HVAC systems as much as they could.
Do we have a lot of windowless classrooms in the high school? I don't know.
I'm not sure how many.
Okay.
Yeah, I found it. It was right in front of me. Stillwater Area High School, we have 2,736 students. At this time, we have 19,967. That doesn't make sense. AB, okay, AB, we have 769 on the C days. We have, that doesn't make sense. 2,736 students. And we have 9,900, I'll have to run this number. It's off. I know we have 769 on C days.
You can get back to us on that.
I will get back to you. Oakland Middle School, we have 986 students, which we have 755 on the dial and 231 on the C days or 100% online. At Stillwater Middle School, we have 919 students. We have 716 on in person or on the dial, and we have 203 on the C days or 100% online. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Superintendent Lansfeld, I can just kind of back you up on the numbers that you were asking about at the high school.
I know we don't have 19,000 students.
No, you had the correct number of students at the high school, right around 2,730. Of those, 769 are 100% online or distance learners. And so approximately 28-29%, right around there, of our students are still 100% online. And we are anticipating that there may be some movement after tonight's decision.
Okay, thank you. Mara or Bryn, what are you hearing in terms of whether students are coming back right away?
I've actually heard people are pretty excited to be back in school. I think overall, like teachers and students alike are just a little bit nervous about, COVID and how things are going to play out, since it has been a really long time since we've all been in the building together. So I think kids are just a little nervous about having, you know, like the full class sizes and like also just going to school 4 days a week and waking up every morning because it's going to be a little different. But I think we're all excited to, you know, get back in it and start talking to people and making connections again.
And just to follow up with that, I have heard, like we've discussed this in class a couple times, and there are a lot of students who are like threatening almost to go online because they don't want to go back. So I would not be surprised if there was an increase in fully online students, but they could just kind of be saying whatever and not actually mean it. So we'll see.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions then before we move on? Okay, thank you very much for that presentation. The next item on our agenda is contract reviews, and we'll go to Dr. Tyne.
Board Chair, board members, Superintendent. The procedure for dealing with contracts within the district states that administration is able to approve contracts under $50,000. Also part of that procedure is that contracts that are under that amount and approved by administration will come before the board at the second meeting of the month. There are 9 of those contracts listed in your packet, and I will be able, they're very much below that threshold. I'll be happy to stand for questions if you have any.
Okay, any questions on that? Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Tyne.
Thank you.
You might as well just stay where you are because the next item on our agenda is budget assumptions. And so we will go back to Dr. Tyne on that.
Well, I just learned we have 19,000 students, so I think our budget problems are over, so we can move on. Oh, no. I guess we're going to have to go through this.
That's a lot more, that's more money.
Thank you, Board Chair, board members, Superintendent. What I'd like to do tonight is just review with you some information that deals with the budget. There's a short agenda tonight, and I would ask Carissa to go to the next page. Thank you, Carissa. We're going to talk about the 2021 budget timeline, the 21-22 assumptions that we're creating the budget under, and also a review and update on the 2021 fiscal year. And then I'm hoping that I answer all your questions so we will be able to get to work and get the budget put together. If you go to the budget timeline, I just want you to know that I broke it down by months. And one of the reasons for that is we are in the middle of kind of unusual time right now. And that unusual time is caused some disruption in how the district operates on a normal fiduciary function. So February, if you take a look, is set for reviewing the budget assumptions and timelines to make sure you're brought up to date. And then that's part of the meeting tonight is the update to the school board. On March 3rd, we're going to have the revenue projections for the 21-22 year in place, and we're going to start building our expenditure budget around that. Also in March, early in March, the budget worksheets will be shared with all buildings and departments. They'll go out. And a number of the information, the things that are really not holding up the process, but are a great part of the process are one, enrollment, which I tongue-in-cheek talked about a minute earlier, and staffing also is a very important thing. I just want to remind the board that over 80% of every dollar, 80% of all the dollars that we spend in this district are spent on salaries and benefits. So it's a real important function that we have. I also, during that month, we're going to be working with the ESSER funds, SR2, the elementary secondary funds. And enrollment is very important. I've received some information from the state, and we know the governor has put out a budget, but that's a process that takes a long time to deal with too. So there are some things that are left unsettled dealing with the state, the federal, the enrollment, and also our staffing. At the end of March, March 25th, there'll be another budget update provided to the school board where we'll have better information to give you some idea of where we're at right now. Enrollment at the present time looks like we're going to have fewer students, Fewer students mean fewer sections. And you noticed going through your retirements tonight that there were a number of retirements from our elementary schools and in other programs within our district. Although we're sad to see our wonderful staff retire and move on to the next phase of their life, it does provide some flexibility to the district, which allows them to fill those spots and help create the budget. Information is the coin of the realm. In April, the budgets will be back to the finance department and they'll all be put together, and that will take place during the early part of April. And in May, we'll have the budget, initial 21-21 budget, and will be reviewed by the finance department. I have to let you know, board, that if doing this for longer than I care to mention, that very seldom do we send out information to members of our staff and our team, and they bring back budgets that absolutely balance and everything works out well. There are going to have to be some decisions made during that period of time. During the end of May, the draft, or mid-May, the draft budget will be reviewed by the school board. And at that time, the school board will probably be put in the position to make some decisions based on the information that we provide them or the superintendent does. June 10th is the drop, not the drop dead date, June 30th is, but we would like to have the budget, preliminary budget, put on the agenda for June 10th for approval. And that's so there is one more board meeting after that in case we have to make some emergency adjustment. So that's the basic overview of the timeline. Now, how do we build that budget? It's built on budget assumptions. And these are all listed, they're listed below. You've had a chance to look at some of them, I know you have, and this is more for the public. I want you to know that revenues are listed in red because many times revenue are beyond the control of the district. Right now, what we're projecting is a 0% increase in the per pupil formula. And I know that all of you probably have read the governor's recommendation. He's requesting more money, but until we see the money in hand, it's pretty unwise for the district to put that into the budget and then try to back it out at a later date. Levy revenue will be based on the December 20 approved levy. Now, the previous board, the board before the election, approved a levy, and that's what we're going to build the budget on, and that's been approved on December 20th and goes to the State Department. Enrollment will be projected using the most current information from the enrollment department. And we do have some information we've been working on. I would be less than truthful if I said we were very happy with the enrollment numbers. We hope that they're going to increase, and we look like there has been a brief glimmer of hope. There was an increase during the previous month, but decisions do need to be made. There will be no increase in special education appropriation statewide. And again, the governor has indicated he's willing to support an increase. But until that is approved by the entire legislature and is in the form of a bill and signed, we won't include that. Any increase in state and federal CARES money or ESSER money revenue will be provided by the finance department. Right now, we just submitted the ESSER 1 final draw. And we're looking for approval from the State Department today. And I have to give kudos to Linda and Lynn for putting that together along with the rest of the team. And we're waiting for about $500,000 in revenue to show up. Also, the SR1 or SR2, which we've mentioned before, which is approximately $1 million. I've been in contact with the department, and they're holding that money for the time being to make sure that when it's distributed and the guidelines are laid out, that the district will have an easy way of accessing that money. So all other revenues will be based on the 2021 levels. And I say this may, and I want you to hear this, that there may be a requirement to partially offset the lack of funding increases with state or local, state and local levels by the fund balance. That may be necessary. depending on how it's put together. That's one of the reasons that you put that together. And that's the decision that you as a board are going to be faced with. Now, on the assumption side, this is within our control. Initial staffing levels will be similar to 2021. In other words, we'll put it together, but we're going to fit it for the enrollment that we have. Maintain the current programs. Assume 2021 salaries if they're settled. Okay. Increase the medical insurance by 3%. Focus resources on the student achievement goals that the district has. Estimate a 2 to 3% staff retirements in staff. No changes in allocation of instructional supplies because of a decline in enrollment. And right now, we're pretty close to being at that right in between about 2.5% in staff retirements. Staff retirements or resignations will be replaced by the best qualified person at the most reasonable cost. Staff adjustments will match enrollment changes by grade level. Spending of the reserve categories will follow state statute. An example will be staff development, integration, revenue, etc. Those dollars are going to have to be spent or allocated where state law dictates. And if there are any carryover funds, we're going to recommend that they be used and injected into the budget in the 21-22 year to help raise revenue. Assumptions are based on our guidelines based on our best estimates with today's information. So that's a lot to absorb, but we're moving ahead. I would like to just touch base, if you will allow me, Board Chair, for 1 second to talk about the current fiscal year. And right now, we don't have, until you approve it, which we think, I hope that you will tonight, the current contract with our teachers. But that's not the only contract that's out there either. We do have some unknowns. We have a principal contract that needs to be addressed. We have a paraprofessional contract that needs to be addressed, and also a custodial contract. And I think that Cindy is going to talk about that a little bit later. That creates some real unknowns in the budget. And also the federal funding. Right now, we're not exactly sure when that $1 million that we're hoping will arrive shows up. And we also don't know what the enrollment is going to be for the remainder of the year either. Board Chair, I'd like to thank you. You've provided some information on declining enrollment revenue that the governor has set aside. Even with that, it doesn't match the amount of money that we would lose because of the declining enrollment. It surely helps. I'm very grateful for it, and I thank you for forwarding it on. But it does cause some angst in the finance department. So we're moving ahead with the best information we can gather in the most expedient way that we can, and trying to make sure that we don't make promises, or in other words, for finance, write a check that we can't back up. So we want to make sure that we have funds to cover what we need. I'd like to kudo previous administration and board for helping us build a fund balance, which is going to, I believe, tide us over. But there's going to have to be some decisions that are going to be made down the road. I would be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Dr. Tyne. Director Weisberg.
Thank you. Thank you, John. One of the questions, and I think we've talked about this before, it was a possibility that our enrollment numbers could be based on what we expected, but I just wanted to clarify, you're saying the budget is going to be based on our actual enrollment, not
Right.
what we were going to have, correct?
The current budget, the 2021 budget was based on the assumption we'd have X number of students. That enrollment number has decreased. And so our revenue will be adjusted down for the current fiscal year. For the upcoming fiscal year, jumping to that, you're right. Our enrollment is going to be less than we anticipated. And because of that, our revenue, this is the big concern really that we have. Enrollment is the coin of the realm. That's what provides the revenue that we need to operate the programs we do. And that's where the tough decisions probably, I'm thinking, may happen down the road. And I surely do not want to panic anybody. We want to be responsible. We want to be current and accurate, and we're going to do the best we can to give you that. But enrollment is so vitally important, and hopefully those kids are going to come rushing back. So student board members, go out and tell your friends to come back to school.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions right now?
I've stunned you into silence. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm sure we will be seeing you again.
Yes, you will.
This isn't the only time that we will be hearing about this, correct?
Absolutely, I guarantee it. And we will be back to you. And I know that the superintendent and the cabinet have been, last Friday, we had a meeting, and I'll tell you, they are very serious people who want to do the best they possibly can. The good news, if I could share a little of it, our long-term facility maintenance fund is in good shape. Our capital fund is in good shape. The thing that food service, because we're going to pick up a little help, I think, and has been managed very well. Our community ed has really carried a large burden here. And one of the reasons they've carried the burden is a lot of their programs are based on fees that we generate. And let's be honest, people have not been joining dance or swimming or other programs. So this has really hurt. And we've also run our child care programs, and we have been operating, even though if we were a business, we'd probably say we shouldn't do that. So I just wanted to say they're working very, very hard, and they take this very, very seriously.
Thank you. Director Sherman.
Hi, John. Just a question. I know typically in a typical year, and I know this is anything but a typical year, just with COVID, with staffing changes, that sort of thing, we would typically see like a revised or updated budget December, January.
Yeah.
I know in my mind, I'm thinking that maybe the audit had something to do with that being a little later, maybe contracts not being settled. I guess I just want you to maybe explain for people who typically follow our budgets and expect it to come in December, January, why it's February.
Well, I can't speak for people who aren't here, but I can tell you that usually what happens is in the fall, when the October 1st enrollment comes out, budgets are adjusted upwards and downward. And also the budget, we know how many students are going to show up. We know the staffing that's going to be in place. Most contracts are settled at that time. But this was an unusual year where those things didn't happen. And because of that, and also with COVID, it really put us in a very unusual place. Rather than invest the time to go back and try to put numbers in boxes that wouldn't be accurate, we're going to do the best we can to give you updated information on what it looks like. In a normal year, next year, I would be very surprised and very shocked if the revised budget doesn't take place, the work in October, November, and then comes to the board in early January, late December for approval to bring it up to date. And so I have to tell you, we're flying, I wouldn't say completely blind, but we are using instruments right now to get where we need to go. And we want to put our time and effort into making the best information possible for the board for this upcoming year. 21-22 is what I am probably losing sleep about.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else with questions? All right, thank you, Dr. Tyne. I appreciate the report.
Thank you very much.
All right, we're going to move on to our next report, which is a policy work update. And Dr. Cherry will give us that report.
Thank you, Chair Petrie, members of the board, Superintendent Lansfeld. I'm going to provide you with a very quick update on the policy working group and the work that we have ahead of us. We have a brand new policy working group. We have all new board representatives on this working group, and myself as a new administrative liaison to the board on that as well. So there has been a little bit of a break in policy revisions and updates and proposals that have come before the board since November, I believe, was the last update to the board. This new policy working group is going to begin meeting on March 3rd. We plan to meet every Wednesday prior to a board meeting week. We'll meet at noon on Wednesdays. These meetings are open to the public. At this time, we will continue to meet virtually. And if the public would like additional information about the meetings and the times and the locations, there's additional information that is posted on the website. Our work, what we have ahead of us at this time. The first item, and we are really looking at prioritizing the work that's ahead of us. The previous policy working group has done some very tremendous work in the last couple of years in renewing and revising policies to put them in alignment with the Minnesota School Board Association's model policies. We still have a number of old policies on our books, and so we're operating at this time with 2 different numbering systems, oftentimes for the same topic or the same type of policy. So the first thing that we'll look at doing is converting the policy numbering system so that they're aligned to the Minnesota School Board Association's model policies. The second item is ensuring that mandatory policies are updated and in place. There are certain policies that are required by statute to be in place and to be updated on an annual basis or on a specific cycle of review. And we do have a couple of those areas where we do not have current models or current policies in place. And then the third task that we really have in front of us is to implement that review cycle of all of our school district policies. We do have some of our policies that were written in the 80s and haven't had any revisions since then. So we want to ensure that we have an accurate review cycle that we are attending to and bringing policies for review and updates to the board on a regular basis. And so this is just a really short update so that the entire board understands the work that's ahead of us as a working group, and this board can expect to see multiple policies as we move forward for revision at each meeting, because like I said, there is quite a bit of work for us to do. And so with that, I'll just take any questions if any members of the board may have one.
Thank you, Dr. Cherry. Any questions? No? Okay. Thank you very much. We will move on to our next item, which is boundary realignment for neighborhoods 32B North and 32B South. Mr. Drummerhausen.
Good evening, Chair Petrie and members of the board. This report today is to try to provide some clarity within our 32B North and 32B South boundaries. So I just want to read you a little background here before we get into it. There's an addition of housing developments at the corner of Hudson Road and Settlers Ridge Parkway in Woodbury, which has allowed us to look at our attendance boundaries for both 32B North, which is currently a Lake Elmo boundary, and 32B South, which is currently a Brookview boundary. So if you look at the presentation here, you can see on the bottom of our screen, the circled area is the area that we're going to look at here. And the next slide, we're going to go in a little more detail. So currently, as you look at this, the green is a Lake Elmo boundary and the purple is a Brookview boundary. So as you look at this slide, there's a little sliver that goes right up goes right up Settlers Ridge to Hudson Road and then all the way up to 94, which is currently Brookview Elementary. At the corner there's a housing development. There's actually 4 housing developments there together, but it affects one housing development there where there's a sliver that technically is part of the Brookview attendance area, and the majority of that housing development is in the Lake Elmo attendance area. So in looking at this is before anybody moves in, it's still in construction, but before anybody moves in, just to provide clarity to the district as well as the beyond apartments about where those students would attend. So our recommendation is to make all of that area, in the next slide, is to make all that area green. And then that apartment area can join with all the adjacent developments next to it to be part of Lake Elmo Elementary School. I have talked to the Beyond Apartments and they are aware of this, and they actually thought they were Lake Elmo, so they have been promoting that in their literature. I've also talked to Stephen Gordy, the principal of Lake Elmo Elementary School, about this, and he is on board with this as well. So this is a report today. We'll be coming back to the next board meeting on March 11th to look for an action from there. So with that, I will open it up for any questions or comments that people may have.
All right, thank you very much. Director Hockert.
Thank you, Mr. Drummerhausen. Not sure if you can answer this, but in apartment complexes, I think from demographics studies, we don't expect a huge population of students. Is that kind of what we are expecting from this housing development? And I'm asking that more to figure out how many kids would be going over to Lake Elmo, and would they be able to accommodate those populations over there?
I don't have those specific numbers off the top of my head from Hazel in terms of what a townhome versus an apartment versus a single detached home gets. But as she did her study, this was kind of part of Lake Elmo. And so this is really just looking at this boundary just to provide clarity and making this minor boundary adjustment before a bigger, broader conversation may happen, whether that's next year or the year after, but just to provide clarity as those are done. Okay, so no, I don't have that specific number off the top of my head, sorry.
Okay, anyone else with questions or comments? No? Okay, thank you, Mr. Drummerhausen, for giving us that report. All right, we're gonna move on now to our action items for tonight. And the first one is the SCEA contract. Ms. Gustafson.
Yes, good evening, Chair Petrie and members of the school board. Thank you for having me here tonight. I'm here tonight to seek approval of the 2019-2021 tentative contract agreement with our St. Croix Educators Association. We reached a tentative agreement with help of a mediator from the Bureau of Mediation Services on February 13th. SCEA members reviewed the tentative agreement in the days that followed and voted to approve the agreement on February 18th. The district and the SCEA work collaboratively to reach this tentative agreement. The partnership between teachers and the district is invaluable, especially over the past years. We've worked together to help students learn in distance learning, hybrid learning, and in-person learning. We are truly a team. We rely on each other to help each other out and collaborate all the time in the work that we do together. And so we're very lucky to have a great relationship with this group. I would like to thank members of the SCEA negotiations team, Josiah Hill, Brandon Auger, Aaron Danielson, Todd Kapsner, Kim Schneider, Jason Taverna, and Darby Whitehill, and the members of the district negotiations team, Tina Riley, Katie Hockert, Melinda Lansfeld, John Tyne, and Vanessa Norby, for all the time and effort dedicated to this negotiations process. We truly do look forward to working with everyone in the near future on the next contract. Our tentative agreement falls within the financial parameters approved by the school board, and so I request your approval of the 2019-2021 SCEA master contract.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Would someone like to move that we accept the contract proposal? Dr. Parbeni. Second, Director Hockert. Great, thank you. Discussion, questions, comments? Director Riley.
Thank you. I guess I come today with a little bit of frustration. There's been a lot of things that have been said out in the public about the board that has started the negotiations process. There were 19 meetings that were held before mediation. The school board never never canceled a meeting. They showed up. The SCA stopped negotiating when they stopped negotiating in, let's see here. I need to get down to the page of my notes here. In July, they literally stopped negotiating. We continue to ask them to continue to come and to meet. It took a little bit of time to gather our mediation abilities with who we were working with to set up our first mediation. I'm frustrated because, to me, they stopped negotiating because of the election. Now, we've settled with other groups prior to the election at the parameters that were initially set. It has not historically happened that we have gone back and revisited and changed parameters. I'm concerned about the precedent we've just set. The groups that we settled with initially settled out of good faith. They knew the predicament of COVID and the instability of the finances at the time. And even though they may not have really liked those parameters, they were working for all of us. I can't put my name on these new parameters. I just can't. When I know we're going to have cuts coming up next year, and those cuts have already been talked about. We came into this, I came onto this board at a 0 and 4, and we had to cut 2.1 million. And we're above that, literally above that. I can't sign my name onto those cuts. So the union comes back, they get their board elected, $10,000 they put into it, and they've got a return of investment of what, 1.6, $1.3 million. And this whole time, the accusations were made that it was the board. And I completely disagree that this was the board. This was the board. This was the union representation, and I am extremely disappointed in what's happened. We had mediations that would be set up, and we didn't have commitment to finish the job during these mediations. Frustrating. Childcare wasn't set up for those that were attending out of the SCA, or they didn't clear their schedules to finish this and get the job done. I did those things. I was ready to go all night, and I don't feel that we were met in good faith. I'm extremely disappointed in this process. I know that there has been some turnover between administration. Cindy, I think you've done a wonderful job, but leading up to this, I'm concerned about what happened leading up to this between maybe past administration. The board was blamed for not starting immediately. There was initial meetings. There was 7 meetings, and on the 7th meeting, the board set their parameters starting in July with the board and the past administration. The past administration led the charge, not the board. The past administration set those meetings up. The past administration is why the parameters weren't established until November 14th, not the board. And I'm really kind of tired about some on this board that are making accusations without information, without knowledge, without having been there, and without understanding the picture of what really happened. But I will not support this. I will not put my name on these cuts coming next year.
Thank you. Director Hockert.
Thank you, Chair Petrie, and thank you to Cindy too for all of your hard work with this difficult process. And I also joined Tina in this negotiations process, and I had a different experience. She was definitely on the going through the process from the very beginning. And from my experience, it was frustrating. There's definitely a lot of things that we need to figure out how to make this into a more efficient and effective process. And I totally believe that we can get to that point with some reflection on what has happened over the last 2 years. My understanding is that the contract before this settled actually at 0 and 4.44. And this one for the teachers is 0 and 4.2. And so that is technically below what they've settled in the past. And we've also, the teachers have agreed to below the state average in increases for this year. So we kind of had to find a middle ground to reach. It has taken us nearly 2 years to get here. It has been a long slog, and this biennium that we have been settling has been for the past 2 years, the pre-COVID biennium. So there's been a lot of working through what is going to be a fair settlement, and the administration did have to come back to the board and recognize that we needed to get this done because it was holding up our progress. As John Tyne had mentioned earlier, that contracts are a huge part of our budgeting process, and we need to get this done so that we continue to move forward. And I think that the settlement ended in a fair place that I definitely can support. And as we move forward, we will have to take into account some pretty stark budget realities. And I hope that we can get to a place that we're comfortable with supporting our teachers, who are greatly valued by our district and by our students and staff. They have a great reputation. So I believe that it is a fair contract, and I am happy to support it.
Thank you. Director Weisberg.
Thank you. I'd like to be clear that every single board member except one on the previous board advocated for increases in teacher salaries. My understanding is that all those meetings are recorded. So if anybody had the desire to listen to any of those meetings, they are welcome to go back and listen to all of that. My understanding is once these negotiations are completed, that people can request that, not just teachers, but that the public can. And I want to restate, every single board member except one advocated for increases. The question was, how much of an increase could we afford to give? The previous administration led us to believe at the beginning we couldn't afford very much. So that's where we started. We found out later, we were told that all of a sudden this new money was discovered. And then it went right into the bus facility disaster. And then COVID hit. So the parameters we initially set were where we should have stayed. For some reason, even though we were told in January that those parameters they thought would work with mediation, when the union finally decided to come to the table, they came back with a higher ask, which I'm told is unheard of. And I think very tone deaf to what we're going to be facing next year. We have no idea how many students will come back. I'm just going to read a quick sentence from the Star Tribune on Saturday. Districts saw double-digit percentage declines in their student populations and are now making plans for major cuts to staff, class offerings, and student programs. I heard disturbing comments in our closed sessions where current board members said things like, I'm happy to make cuts later to give teachers what they want now. I'm not happy to make those cuts later. When I came on the board and we had to cut $2 million, those cuts were painful, and all of the things administration told us we needed to cut affected students. We tried very hard to keep those cuts out of the classroom. I do not think that it is responsible to make a statement like that, to give teachers what they want now. I'm happy with cuts later. I'm not happy with that. And I don't think that this represented all teachers to begin with. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Sherman.
You know, I think we have to be careful where we are, no doubt. No one here is going to argue that we're going to be embarking on some tough times. Every single school district will be. We have, we're not the only district experiencing a significant enrollment loss. The next biennium is going to look very different, and we're in a completely different situation. I think we need to remember that these contract processes, if anything I've learned kind of being new walking into this board, there's a shared responsibility for its success and failure. And from what I can see, everybody at the table shares some responsibility in that. I think that we have a board here at this table or this Zoom call that is willing to kind of deep dive into the process, what worked, what didn't, where we can do better, where we can be better partners. To me, again, we're either going to succeed collaboratively or fail collaboratively. And I think that there's much in this process that needs to be revisited. We were in a position of being last in the state to settle for the last biennium. And when we establish parameters, I think that what the board decides at the board table needs to mimic those parameters. So when we spend $600,000 for the priority of removing past staff and hiring consultants and paying for increases in legal fees, the community, including our staff, sees that and they wonder, well, if they have money to do that, then certainly they have money to at least get us to state average, which this contract is still just slightly below state average. This was going to go to a bad place. And my priority is students, getting the students back in our classroom. And this was, from my perspective, being new on the board, being the last in the state, we just didn't have a lot of room here to go other than to a strike before a levy. And I'm not willing to do that to our students. And I don't think anyone would want to see that. I don't think families would support that. Our teachers have high approval ratings. They're working very hard year over year. And again, it's state average. We're not, giving away the farm. We have a fund balance that is allowing us to do this and stay within our board parameter, our board policy of 5%. I feel fortunate that that's the case. I just say, let's focus on moving forward. Let's focus on getting what we need to get done for our staff, for our community, for our students, and let's work together and succeed collaboratively instead of attacking one another.
Director Riley.
Thank you. Yeah, you're right. We did have a decent fund balance or an okay fund balance, and we had to work very, very hard to get there. And there was resistance to start that with the last administration, to be careful of what was moving ahead. But I think something that we need to be careful about as well, I know something I heard a lot of was the salary schedule improvements need to match the revenue increases. So basically the union leadership wants exactly what the district gets from legislation or from the state feds every year. That's not going to leave us any funding to do any programming left. And something we hear from legislators is, why do I need to advocate, or why would I continue to advocate for more funding for your district when it just goes to teacher salaries? There are things that we're not getting accomplished here. And I think we need to be careful about not being able to offer programming that will help us do better. We have a decline in academics. We're going to now have COVID. We're going to have recovery for our students for COVID, and we're going to have to pay for that. So I think we need to be careful about, we've opened up a can of worms here as to set a precedent of revisiting and going back, and they can hold out and push and hold out and push and continue up. So, legislators are watching, the government's watching, and I think you need to be careful.
Director Probeni.
Hopefully you can all hear me. Thank you, Chair Petrie. 4.4%. And now we have 0 and 4.2%. That's a difference there. And I think the negotiation in terms of what we negotiated was a bit lower than what was there before. But I'd like to say this. We talk about how fantastic our teachers are. And I think it's important that we're transparent here. We talk about how fantastic our teachers are. We talk about how great they are, and we sit here and chastise. Would we have preferred that our teachers go on strike? And remember, we're not giving them much more than any other district has given their own teachers. These are negotiations. That's why you go to the table, you negotiate. And I think thus far, the administration did a good job in terms of what they came up with. Would we have preferred that our teachers go on strike? Us as a community to answer that. Our students stay at home, especially in this COVID situation. And I repeat, we did not give the teachers much more than any other district gave theirs. The administration negotiated lower than what was given to the teachers prior. 0 and 4.4 as to 0 and 4.2. If we cannot take care of our own, I'm in the business of taking care of people, I'm in human resources. And if we sit here and make claims to how great the teachers are, yet we sit and talk about us just throwing money at teachers when all they're asking for is to be fair, I think is an injustice. I'm saying this because it's easy for us to speak of how well they are, how great they are, but behind refusing to support a process that will continue to allow them do the job they're here to do. And these are people that take care of our kids. Our children spend much more time with these teachers than they spend with us at home. We've talked about how great the quality of teachers that we have in this district, and we sit here and talk about how we want to shortchange our teachers as compared to other districts. All I'm saying, as much as the process might have been extremely frustrating, we should look at where we are. We should look at where what we've been able to accomplish. And we should truly acknowledge the work that these teachers have done for our children, and of course, within the community itself. These teachers are part and parcel and parents within our community. Day in, day out, they risk their lives to support our children. When called upon, they never say no. It is not a bargain where we just go out and we just give them because they deserve it. No, they worked for it. They negotiated it. And we were able to also negotiate in the process of making sure we come to an agreement. That's what this is about. So please, I really think that we need to be careful in terms of how we speak about the people that support our kids and how also our children view the teachers that serve service within our community. Thank you.
Director Onken.
Since this contract is nearly at its end already, and we haven't even agreed to give it away yet, we're going to vote on here soon. But my question, and this is rhetorical, but would we all feel the same way had this been negotiated and had it been voted on near the beginning of the biennium, when we had a good economy and 4% at that time would have been acceptable? Why wouldn't it still be acceptable now? I know the answer to that. We're in a tough time. I get that. But the issue is here is this is a contract that was negotiated 2 years behind. And so we need to get this done so we can move on and we can work on the levy, and we need the teacher support for that as well. We also need the community support for that. And my guess is that if this had been settled a year and a half ago, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about this is too much. It would have been an acceptable contract at that time. So it should be an acceptable contract now. Moving forward, next biennium, I don't think you're going to see huge increases. It's not going to happen for any bargaining unit for that matter, and probably not in any district for that matter. Bargaining units know that. When you come on tough times, it happens. I'm a teacher myself, and I've been in districts where that has happened, where you accept very little, less than 1% sometimes. So I will be voting for this. I am in support of it. Granted, we may have to make some cuts next year. and it may not be fun to do, but the teachers are our backbone in this district, and 80% of what we pay out every year goes to staffing. So, you know, when you talk about legislators saying that they don't want to give more money because we're just going to give it to our staff, well, what else are we using it for? It's 80% of our budget. Of course, we're going to be using it for staff.
Thank you. Director Weisberg.
Thank you. Again, I would like to say that only one board member wanted parameters of 0 and 0. Every other board member on the previous board advocated for increases to teachers. And so this has been insinuated in a couple of closed sessions to insinuate that anybody, and it was just said tonight, trying to shortchange teachers. That's not what it's about. It's trying to offer teachers as much as we can afford. And now for the second time, I've heard board members tonight say, I don't have a problem making cuts later to do what they want today. That is irresponsible to continue to have to make cuts in programming. And people keep throwing out, last time it was 4.4. Yes, and we had to make $2.1 million of cuts. I do not want to go through that again. Apparently, nobody else has a problem with it. We also heard other disturbing comments in closed session. If we have a big fund balance, we're not going to pass a levy, so we need to spend the fund balance down. This is public money. So it's asinine to me to say, you know what, we're going to spend this money that you gave us so that we can ask you for more. That is irresponsible. And the fact that the teachers union came back and asked for more money in the negotiation in this year, to me, is irresponsible. And I cannot support this at all.
Director Provini.
You know, I don't want to go back. Thank you, Chair Petrie. I don't want to go back and say, you know, we had 2 years to do this. It's tiring looking backwards, whether it's the previous board or the previous administration. It's unnecessary. We're here. We have to do work. Remember, the parameters of setting this at 8% was done by the board. We're not obligated to stay at 8%. And we have to do what works for our community, for our students, our teachers. We're at 5%. Nobody has said anything about a cut. We're still within the parameters at 5%. Nobody has said anything about a possible cut because we're at 5%. We didn't go lower than 5%. So setting a parameter that has the flexibility to change, but as long as we stay within, we're still okay. So I don't understand where the talks about a cut is coming from. I have no intention of calling anyone irresponsible, regardless of the fact that we weren't able to do this within the last 2 years. So I will ask that please, when we speak, we try to respect one another here and at least try to speak in ways that is more constructive and also for us to move forward. Thank you.
Director Onken.
I don't think anybody thinks that it's going to be happy or they're going to be happy to be able to have to make cuts. And we don't know if we're going to have to make cuts. We have no idea. Budget forecasting is budget forecasting, and we don't know what we're going to get from the feds because of COVID relief. Maybe we get nothing, and maybe we do have to make cuts, and we will cross that bridge when we get there if we need to. At this point, I see Director Sherman has a question, but I think we kind of know where everybody's at on this. And Chair Petrie, I would like to see the question asked.
Director Sherman.
I certainly agree with Director Corbini. I want to look forward. I want to look, the community doesn't know we're, the contract that we're voting on tonight is for the last biennium. We're almost at the next contract cycle, which starts in May. So we have, as a new board, all seven of us, we have, April to figure out and work through a better process, to learn from what wasn't done well last time that led us to being last in the state. I'm committed to that. I think we have a board that is committed to doing better. just a couple factual things that I want to share, and then I'm certainly happy to call the question as Director Onken would like. The fund balance that we had going up before we settle this contract, I just want to make clear that that was without any bargaining groups coming out of the budget. That was without any staffing groups being paid. So what looked like a large fund balance was actually really not. And John Tyne can probably speak to that a little bit more if we need to further clarify that. But essentially, the fund balance is up and down depending how soon contracts get settled. And being last in the state, we just didn't have that taken out. I also go back to the fact that our current superintendent and her leadership team, this was a top priority for them. We have an important year. In our community, we need to desperately pass a levy to better serve our kids. And we see lots of great ideas, lots of good opportunities. But we do have this levy to pass. And so I appreciate the superintendent's priorities and want to support that. We talked a little bit about the legislative funding that the legislators fight hard for every year to provide that extra funding for the school district. And I thank those legislators for that. That money is very helpful. I think this year, 2% equated to about 1.2 million, a little bit more than that. And again, not to belabor, because every board has its own priorities, but half of that, almost half, was spent on removing the last administration and staff that was tied to her team. That was just a priority, and that is what it is. But I think those legislators would prefer that we pay staff that work directly with students than some of the other priorities that we could come up with as a board. Lastly, again, I really want to move forward. I want to know that this is going to be a collaborative process that we can all work through together. The next biennium is going to look very different, and hopefully we can do better for our community. Our community deserves that. And with that, I would call the question.
I have been keeping track, and everyone here, except for Katie, has spoken twice. And so we are going to move on. I also support—
Chair, I need to clarify a statement that was made, please.
Director Riley.
Thank you. I just want to clarify that the past administration had our reserve fund balance down just over 4%. So it was very, very low. We worked very, very hard to get it up to where it is. So I want to make that clear that we did work hard. It was just over 4%. It was being spent down.
I would just like to say that I'm also going to vote for this. I believe that if ever there was a year that we need to express our thanks and appreciation for teachers with a contract that is actually a little bit less than the state average, that this is the year. These teachers have been working. I mean, I have a good friend who works, has been working like more than 70 hours a week. She takes Thursday nights off and Saturday nights off and part of Sunday, and that's pretty much it. Being able to say yes to this contract means that we are still going to be within our parameters in terms of a fund balance. And in terms of trying to keep it high, when we do that, we do it at the expense of our teachers. We really do need to express our thanks to them with a contract that is only fair. So I would like to ask Joan to take the vote.
Director Hockert?
Yes.
Director Onken?
Yes.
Director Porbeni?
Yes.
Director Riley?
No.
Director Sherman?
Yes.
Director Weisberg?
No.
Chair Petrie?
Yes.
You have a 5-2 vote. Motion carries.
Thank you. Next item is the CST addendum. And that is Mr. Liebengood. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Drummerhouse. Drummerhouse,
Yeah.
are you doing it tonight?
Yep, Lance is unable to make it, so you're
Okay.
stuck with me for another presentation. So
Sounds great. Thank you.
good evening again, Chair Petrie and members of the board. Today, administration is seeking approval of the amended 2020-21 transportation contract with Collaborative Student Transportation Minnesota, or otherwise known as CST. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, an amended contract was agreed upon on February 1st, 2021, whereas CST and the Stillwater Area Public Schools agreed to pay 84% of the contracted rate for the previously scheduled routes that were not able to run. This is in alignment with our amended MTN contract that the board previously approved, and a copy of the amended CST contract was provided in your packet. So CST is our van provider, and they run our out-of-district routes for students who attend 916 programming or are homeless, and so they provide our van transportation for the district. So with that, I will open up to any questions or comments that you may have.
Okay, can we get a motion to approve this addendum? Director Onken, is there a second? Director Sherman, thank you. Any questions or comments on this? Okay, Joan, can you take the roll on this, please?
Director Hockert,
Yes.
Director Onken,
Yes.
Director Porbeni, nope, thank you. Director Riley,
Yes.
Director Sherman,
Yes.
Director Weisberg,
Yes.
Chair Petrie.
Yes.
You have a 7-0 vote. Motion
Thank
carries unanimously.
Thank you, Joan. And the final action item for tonight is the learning model change. And we have had a presentation already from Superintendent Lansfeld. Does someone want to make a motion on this? Director Onken.
I motion that we accept the change and go with what is being recommended by Superintendent Lansfeld.
Thank you. Is there a second? Director Porbeni. Discussion. Director Sherman.
I guess for me, it's just, I know we've had the report, and then we had another report and questions, and I just want the community to know that these decisions are always really difficult. And I mean, as much as we talk about how hard teachers are working, our students and our families and caregivers of our students are incredibly taxed this year and have gone above and beyond. And so for that, I know I speak for everyone on the board, how appreciative we are for everyone in our community. Custodians, nutrition, I mean, paraprofessionals, everyone has gone above and beyond. We are not going to make anyone or everyone happy here. We're going to ask to kind of decide on this and then move forward and do the best that we possibly can for our kids. So I guess what I just want to say, I recognize that everyone feels differently on this. There are a lot of kids that are out there that the distance learning model just is not meeting their academic and emotional needs. And I just want to keep in mind that for those that are thriving in distance or prefer from a safety standpoint, just a distance learning model, that is still available to them. And you can make that change at any point in time. So yeah, so I'm ready to vote.
Director Weisberg.
Thank you. And I just want to be sure people know, because we've gotten a lot of emails about it too, that people can elect to go distance at any time, even if that's not something that was happening before. The problem for me has been all along, that's not an option for our teachers. We're very close to being able to get people that want to be vaccinated, at least with their first dose. I think Superintendent Lansfeld said maybe 50% of teachers have been vaccinated at this point. We've gotten emails from some teachers that think that the percentage is a little bit less than that. So to me, we've gotten so far. I think when we pulled way back in November, December, that's why our numbers are going down so far. I'm nervous that once we open everything up again, we're going to expose our community to a lot of risks. So my personal opinion, even though I know that students, younger students maybe aren't getting sick, that doesn't mean they can't be carriers and expose teachers in our community to more risk than we need to do right now. So I'm fine if I'm the only one not supporting it, but I wish we would wait and at least stick with what we had decided before and let more people have the opportunity to be vaccinated. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Director Parbeni.
Thank you, Chair Petrie. You know, the reality of the situation is that the administration is in a very difficult position. We have the inability for them to make decisions to who gets vaccinated or not is not in their hands. And the governor is indicated that students go back to school. So, I mean, there's that piece from the governor, but yet the administration here does not have the ability to make those decisions as to place people for vaccinations. So they're making the very best in terms of, making the best of the situation that is, being offered to them. And so, but I'd like to use this opportunity to really thank our families out there, because the families, our ability to be able to do what we do today is because of them. We know it's difficult for a lot of our parents. It's difficult for a lot of our teachers, especially those that haven't been vaccinated. There's a lot of, fears. There's a lot of concerns out there. I agree with you, Director Weisberg. It's really, really hard for our teachers out there. And the fear, too, of contacting the virus and actually taking it home to maybe their elderly parents. Where it's hard. It's a difficult balance. And so I'm hoping that we can all work together as a community to make this happen for our students, but also to support our teachers in this process and to make sure our students are comfortable and they know what is right and what is wrong. So it's all hands on deck as a community. And I think this is the time that we need to step up and really come together and make this happen for our kids, but also make sure that we're all supporting the process for the success that we also, all of us expect. So again, thanks to our families, thanks to our teachers, and thanks to the administration. I know how hard it is that you guys have to balance this. And so we really commend the effort there, but I'm hoping that all of us can work together. We're bored, but I think your voices are more important than ours right now. And we need all of your input and support to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Hockert.
Thank you, Chair Petrie. And just to echo some of what Director Parbeni was just speaking about, in that it really is kind of all hands on deck getting our kids back into school. And for me personally, this has been a really complex process to try to decide where to land on this. I have heard from the community, I've heard from staff, I've been reading all of your emails in detail, and there are so many perspectives out there and so many heartfelt, hard stories on every side, from students who are really legitimately struggling, and parents and families and teachers who are legitimately anxious to return at this point in quite a rushed fashion compared to the previous model that we have approved. And for me, I'm landing in a position of following the governor's guidelines, as we've been doing as a district the whole time. I feel like we need to follow the science, and quite frankly, we're at a point where we need to learn to live with this disease the best we can and follow the mitigation strategies as best we can. And there really isn't going to be a perfect solution no matter where we end up or when we go back. So as concerned as I am for the health of everybody, and I legitimately am, I do believe in our staff and I believe in our administration that we can, if they're telling us that we can do this, we can do this. And that the students are going to have to be part of this equation too, in following all the protocols and giving their teachers space, and their families need to be patient with the staff as we move back. And just because we're back in person doesn't mean that we're all free and clear. And that, quite frankly, I'm afraid complacency in these mitigation strategies could lead to outbreak. And that concerns me deeply. But at the same time, from an educational perspective, I believe our district is giving our families the best options possible in this very complex year by allowing our students to go back in person and also have online learning options. And then the flexibility as well, if the online isn't working or if the in-person isn't working, to kind of make those decisions as we go through. So I do support this decision to go back, and but it's not with great reservation, and I hope that this is the right direction for our district right now.
Thank you. Anyone else? I would just like to say that this has been a really a hard decision. We have gotten a lot of emails from people on the wide spectrum of opinions on this whole thing. And I know that this is going to be so hard on some teachers. You know, the scramble to get things up and going much more quickly in the middle of a quarter is a hard thing. We're asking teachers to do a hard thing. And if I were ever to win the lottery, I would give every teacher $1 million because that's kind of what they deserve because of everything that they've done this year. But I've read such heartbreaking stories from parents whose students are really, really struggling, and they look at their students and they wonder if they are going to be permanently derailed by this experience. I feel as though those who want to get back in the schools need to get back in the schools. And the other thing that I would just like to say is just an appeal to the community. Please, please allow these students to stay in classes. Please don't send your child to school if he or she is sick. Be vigilant about all of that. Please help us keep the students in school. Thank you. So I think we're probably ready to vote on this. Joan, can you take the roll?
Director Hockert?
Yes.
Director Onken?
Yes.
Director Porbeni?
Yes.
Director Riley?
Yes.
Director Sherman?
Yes.
Director Weisberg? And Chair Petrie?
Yes.
You have a 6-1 vote. Motion carries.
Thank you, Joan. We move on to board member reports. The first one is the board chair report. I have nothing for tonight. So moving on to working group reports, finance and operations, anything there? Okay. Legislative, we have not met, so nothing there. And policy. Director Hockert, I don't know if you have anything to add. We did sort of have a report on that earlier.
Not too much to add. Dr. Cherry did a nice job kind of running through our priorities. So we're just looking forward to our first official meeting next week.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, and then just individual board member reports. Anyone have anything they'd like to bring forward? Director Riley.
Thank you. A few things. On Thursday, February 11th, I participated in a press conference in support of HF 1051 House File, and it's the companion to Senate File 2. On February 12th, hang on just a second, please. On February 12th, I attended the SEED general meeting. In there, we had conversation from Representative Jim Dabney. We also talked about the November budget showing a $1.3 billion deficit. And we heard from Dr. Kim Gibbons from the Center for Applied Research and Educational Improvement at the University of Minnesota. She discussed pretty much kind of the fallout of COVID and students, and that there will be needing some recovery. She recommends that all students be assessed, because that kind of sets a baseline, and by doing the assessments, that's where we will find out where the interventions will be needed. And then on February 23rd, I attended a Let Them Learn, and I saw, Melinda was there as well, meeting with Dr. Scott Jensen, Senators Uyghur, and Senators Chamberlain. So that's what I had.
Thank you. Anyone else have a report? Director Sherman.
I just wanted to, as a part of our liaison role, I've been able to get into a couple buildings, and I just want to thank, I'm at Stonebridge, so thank you to Principal Berg for a wonderful tour, and thank you to Caitlin Willis in the transition program. And I just wanted to shout out the transition program for a couple of unique things that they offer the community for purchase. They package birdseed that you can buy, and they also hand bake dog treats. So I think that would be great if the community could go check out those offerings. I believe it's on their blog. You can probably access it through our website, going to schools and transition programs, but certainly a neat opportunity for our transition kids to learn some business skills in the community. So that's it.
Great, thank you. Anything else? All right, thank you very much, directors. I call this meeting adjourned.